you want Snapple?
My Snapple.
Thanks for the warning that it might not be great.
I could have brought you some.
Oh, that's okay. On that.
How many?
3.
Well, around here you never know. Sometimes, you know, like some of that salad stuff, they put it in the fridge and they forget it's
do you
there.
want to sort that into the appropriate
One day, we
categories and
got some of
moments?
the chicken salad and it had mold.
Please.
That's one reason why, you know, if nobody else is
These two are
taking
for
home
4.
like he wants stuff, I mean, I'll take it home.
So that doesn't really matter what order it is, right? I mean,
No, just it's whether it's a public, whatever it's called,
yeah, these.
or whether it's to do with one of our.
Yeah, these are both the public. These are all his.
Okay, then.
Can we do our best to hold people to 3 minutes?
And what order do we usually do? Is it
Yeah, that the buzzer will ring and that will be the end of it.
Yeah. Hopefully. I'll do my best.
Do them in this
Just
order?
try and let them finish their thought, and sometimes they don't breathe.
Yeah,
You know.
sometimes they still
5 more minutes, yeah.
We usually do them in support and then opposition and
That's
then
the
neutral?
theory.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Scott, are you ready?
We're on air.
All right. I hereby call the 2,265th meeting of the Milwaukee City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Before we begin this meeting, I'll note that Council President Beatty has been excused from this evening's meeting. First up, we have Milwaukee High School Outstanding Student Achievement Award for March 2018, presented to Olivia Johnson. And welcome, Principal Pender.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and fellow council members. It's good to be here tonight on this beautiful first day of spring. It's going to be like this for the rest of spring, right? So I'm proud to present Olivia Johnson, who, as you have before you, has been done pretty well in high school so far. Got one last semester. Try to be one of those valedictorians. She's a 4.0 GPA. Student leader, has been student government leader, active in all sorts of things that she can tell you more about. Right now, I think, though, I'd like her to tell you that she's changed her college plans since she put there. So, those things, from a month and a half ago to now has changed. But she still, I think, is a math and science person.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm planning on going to Seattle Pacific University and pursuing math, in the fall.
Cool.
And she's active, in volunteering, helping put on the blood drives. She's been a member of the Youth Advisory Council with the district. Of course, obviously Habitat for Humanity, and of course the Relay for Life Committee, which this year the Relay for Life is going to be a little different. Normally we hold it at Alder Creek. And that's a great facility for it because you have the lights on all night and you're not disturbing the neighborhood. But that facility is going under construction. The stands have been condemned, and so we can't use that. Obviously, we can't use ours for a couple reasons. One, we're in a neighborhood and have the lights on all night. Two, we're going to have construction. So we're going to hold the Relay for Life this year in the gym, and that's been an interesting planning piece. So she's been helping plan that, too. What else should I have you talk about?
Well, I've been in student government for 3 years, and it's what I really enjoy. Probably one of the best things in my high school experience is being in student government. We help plan and run all the assemblies, homecoming, all the dances, canned food drives, blood drives, and everything else.
don't know, did you guys see the video that was produced for the Milwaukee reunion weekend there on March 3rd? I don't know. Well, she's one of the stars of it. They did this project in AP US History last year where they brought in alums and interviewed them. So she brought in a special alum. Why don't you tell about that one?
Yeah, so my great-grandmother also went to Milwaukee High School. She graduated in 1950, and I didn't know that until I started going here my freshman year. I was telling her where I was going to high school, and she's like, I graduated there in 1950. I had no idea. So last year we did a project in AP US History where we were assigned an alumni to interview about their experience in high school, and I was able to bring her down. She lives in Seattle, and so I got to interview her and just have some really good conversation with her about what's changed since she was going to school there in the 50s and late 40s, and yeah, we got to be in the video, which was really cool.
That's great. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Fun.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, do you want to start this week?
Sure. Tell me a little bit more about Relay for Life. I'm not very familiar with that, actually.
Yeah, so Relay for Life is an event we participate in every year, usually at Alder Creek. We have teams of around 10 that fundraise. You have to raise at least $100 each person, $1,000 per team, and all of the money goes to the American Cancer Association. And what we do is we stay up all night, and we have one person walking around a track at all times, and yeah, we just raise as much money as possible, and it's a really fun event. We usually do it with Putnam, but it's just us this year.
Okay.
And how much money have we raised? Last year it was $19,000.
Yeah, I think
$19,000, and I think one year I think we hit up like $32,000.
Oh wow,
That's amazing.
yeah.
And where can I find the video that you just referenced?
We just emailed it to you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
They're on it. Well, congratulations.
They're good.
And you have a fantastic resume, and I wish you the best of luck
Thank
up in Seattle. I'm sure you'll succeed.
Thank you.
I was a math minor, by the way, so good luck in being a math major. It was not my favorite. I was a history major, and that's really what I wanted to teach, but they needed math teachers, so.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
But good luck with it.
Thanks.
That's fantastic. I mean, once again, we get to, hear about some, fantastic student at Milwaukee High School, and I think it should give everybody, great pause to think about, how well in such good hands our future is, because our students are all doing so well. So I'm a bit more interested in the Habitat for Humanity, what your projects were there, and what you've been doing.
So this is my first year in it, but what we do is we have different builds throughout the year where we go out into the community and students sign up, and we help build houses for people, and it's just it's part of our National Honor Society. Usually the same kids who are in that do Habitat for Humanity. I haven't been on a build yet, but there's one over spring break, so
oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to.
It's a great way to spend spring break.
Yeah.
Wow. A lasting sort of legacy there. Very nice.
Yeah.
Good. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
What a special experience you got to share with your great-grandmother, and I'm sure she's looking forward to seeing you more in Seattle.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
That's probably really good news for your family. The Youth Advisory Council, so you said that's with the district, and I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit more about what that experience was like.
So I did that my sophomore year, and we met every week to talk about health-based problems in the school, mental health, physical health, and we have a really awesome clinic at our school. It runs like a regular doctor's office, and probably the biggest thing for me we did throughout the year is we went down to Salem and we advocated for school-based health centers around the state and the country, just because they're a really helpful resource for students who can't get medical help elsewhere. So I thought that was really cool.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for doing that, and participating and being active in your community and on behalf of other students at your high school. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank
It's
you.
a great honor.
Awesome.
So were any of the organizations, the leadership organizations that you're involved in the 17-minute walkout last week?
Yeah, I participated in that, and student government kind of helped spread the word about that, and talked about what would go on and, you know, what was happening. We helped make sure everyone knew it was a quiet, respectful event. And there weren't any specific like clubs or groups that like did it. It was kind of anyone who wanted to that went out and did it. It went really well. Yeah.
I look forward to the work that the students nationwide are doing around that, and I think it's actually a shot at starting to shift our country a little bit in that regard. And if the students were of a mind to ask their city council to pass a resolution, that's a possibility.
Oh,
so take that back to the group and think about that.
I need to send an email.
I'm also curious, are you, mathematics, are you interested in theoretical work, or are you interested in teaching? How are you kind of taking?
I'm kind of interested in engineering, but again, I'm not so sure. I'm going to go in doing kind of the basic classes that could do engineering or math to kind of see what I like, but I don't think I'm going to be a teacher, but I'm really not sure. I'm pretty open to, you know, wherever it takes me, majoring in math.
Well, mathematics is a good starter. There's a lot of directions you can go with
definitely.
that are not likely to be roboticized anytime soon. Great.
That's for sure.
Well, once again, nicely done. It's always fun to meet the students that we get to meet. We're amazed, constantly amazed at how impressive you guys are.
Thank you.
So, the City of Milwaukee is proud to recognize for outstanding student achievement in academics, civic engagement, and extracurricular activities at Milwaukee High School, Olivia Johnson. Let it be known to all that on this 20th day of March 2018, the City Council of the City of Milwaukee, a municipal corporation in the County of Clackamas and in the state of Oregon, recognize this student as an excellent example of the bright future of this community and nation.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day Proclamation that will be presented by American Legion Post 180 Commander Mike Wilson and
Jerry's not going to be with us today.
And not Jerry. Okay, then. I won't continue. I hadn't seen him, and I wondered.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and members of the City Council for this opportunity to address the Council and the citizens of Milwaukee. This past Thursday, March 15th, was the 99th anniversary of the founding of the American Legion. The Legion was founded at the end of what was originally known as the Great War, a war supposedly to end all wars. Sadly, World War I was not the end of all wars. The Vietnam War was a contentious time in our country's history. The Legion is pleased to see that the veterans that served in that war are being recognized for their sacrifices. The Vietnam veteran answered the call of their country. They did not start the war, yet they returned home and were vilified for doing their duty for our country. As we use this special day to annually welcome home the Vietnam veterans, let us not only remember their service, but also that many are still suffering from emotional and physical scars that they and their families continue to endure from that conflict. We as Legionnaires and veterans continue to strongly advocate for the benefits that all veterans have earned and deserved for serving their country. The Milwaukee Post is holding a veterans fundraising meal at the Post from 5:30 to 7:30 on Friday, March the 30th, Vietnam Welcome Home Day, and the community is invited and encouraged to attend. In closing, let me say that the Milwaukee American Legion Post deeply appreciates the city's patriotism and ongoing recognition of the contribution our veterans and active duty service members make in keeping us a free people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a proclamation. Whereas the people of Milwaukee and the United States continue to honor the service and sacrifice of American military personnel and their families who served during the Vietnam War. And whereas the United States government has proclaimed a Vietnam Veterans Day at the end of March to coincide with the anniversary of the last day of combat operations in Vietnam. And whereas the Oregon State Legislature has designated March 30th of each year as Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day. And whereas the City of Milwaukee and the American Legion Post 180 are committed to honoring Vietnam veterans and their families, and whereas it is right to reflect on the service and sacrifice given by the men and women who served our nation in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Now, therefore, I, Mark Gamba, Mayor of the City of Milwaukee, a municipal corporation in the County of Clackamas and the State of Oregon, do hereby proclaim March 30th, 2018 to be Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day in the City of Milwaukee. Thank you for your service, and thank you. And that was well spoken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of the February 20th, 2018 work and regular sessions, a resolution reappointing Joel Bergman to the Citizens Utility Advisory Board, a resolution authorizing the refund of a special public works fund loan with the Oregon Infrastructure Finance Authority, a resolution directing the city manager to prepare a job description for an in-house city attorney position and provide at least 30 days notice of the city's intent to terminate its current legal services agreement, a resolution in support of net neutrality, a resolution authorizing the execution and delivery of full faith and credit obligations for an amount not to exceed $21 million to finance the Safe Access for Everyone street surface maintenance program and capital improvement plan infrastructure projects. A resolution authorizing a lease agreement in the amount of $315,950 for a modular unit for the temporary relocation of the Leading Library, and a resolution authorizing an amendment to the city's intergovernmental agreement with Clackamas County Service District 1 related to access and development near Kellogg Creek Water Treatment Plant. Does any member of council wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? I do. I'm going to remove item E, the resolution in support of net neutrality, and item H, the amendment to the intergovernmental agreement with Clackamas County Service District 1. Any other removals?
No, sir.
All right, then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda minus those two.
I'd move to approve the consent agenda minus items E and H.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve tonight's consent agenda minus items E and H. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passed unanimously. So I'll bring the two up now individually. E, a resolution in support of net neutrality. You all got the resolution in your packet, and I added an extra sentence at the end, and you've all got copies. I will read, I'll read the whole resolution, just because taken out of context, it's hard to understand. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Milwaukee, Oregon, to support net neutrality. Whereas on December 14th, 2017, the FCC passed a rule called Restoring Internet Freedom, which repealed net neutrality protections, and whereas the rule was published in the Federal Register on February 22nd, 2018, and will be effective on April 23rd, 2018, And whereas the Milwaukee City Council recognizes that this ruling will have a negative impact on the city of Milwaukee, its residents, and businesses. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Milwaukee City Council supports overturning this ruling. Be it further resolved that the Milwaukee City Council authorizes the mayor and staff to endorse legislation, letters, or efforts to overturn this ruling. And here's what I added. And failing that, and that failing the overturn of this ruling, the Milwaukee City Council will explore alternative methods to secure access to critical, unfettered, high-speed internet services for our residents. So.
Okay.
I support the change, and I think it's critical, as we've discussed previously, that our citizens have access to internet, high speed. Not only critical from a standpoint of this is the way the world's moving and we need high-speed internet access to participate in it, but for an educational standpoint, if our students, especially low-income students, do not have access to this kind of internet service, they fall further and further behind. And it's almost like, as we've discussed, I don't want to steal all your thunder, but that internet service is like a utility. It's like water, it's like sewer. You have to have it to succeed in today's world. So I support your changes, Mr. Mayor.
Was that in the form of a motion?
No, that was in a lecture, maybe. I don't know.
It's a very long motion.
Just thought I'd ask. I mean, it could be a motion.
He said
somewhere
discussion,
in there.
so
I would second that motion.
Well, let's somebody make an actual motion.
Yeah.
I move to adopt the council resolution as amended by the mayor.
I second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded to adopt a resolution supporting net neutrality with an addition of a final sentence. Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Thank you. And the last one, H. So it's a resolution authorizing an amendment to the city's intergovernmental agreement with Clackamas County Service District 1 related to access and development near the Kellogg Creek Water Treatment Plant. More specifically, it's relating to the bridge that we are currently in the process of replacing, whose footings were washed out during an extreme rain event a year and a half ago. The original intergovernmental agreement I was not happy with at the time it was negotiated. And this intergovernmental agreement, and it left a piece of the negotiation undone until now. So there was a portion in the original IGA that called for the city and the county to discuss proportionality on any further repairs or replacement of a bridge. They never did that. We're trying to do it now, and what's been negotiated thus far is an even worse agreement than the first agreement, which was a bad agreement. So I'm recommending, and I will actually make a motion that we reject this agreement and ask staff to return to negotiations with Wes. And my personal hope is that not only will they negotiate a better agreement on the percentage of the bridge replacement that's being paid for right now, but also that they negotiate some amount for ongoing maintenance, which they managed to remove in the current negotiations. We know that this bridge is $500,000 more expensive than it would have had to have been just for the park, because we're running big, heavy trucks full of fluid across it. How many times a day?
We are not.
They are.
They are.
Wes is running big, heavy trucks full of fluid across it twice a day or something like that. So far heavier than anything anybody would be driving into the park otherwise. So we've had to build a more expensive bridge for them, and they are offering to pay like $137,000 towards that more expensive bridge, more expensive by $500,000. So my request to staff is that they go back to the negotiating table and push harder for both more money currently and a better deal for maintenance.
Will do. We'll be back.
So
you need a motion.
I made a motion to reject
I'll second it.
All right. It has been moved and seconded to reject the resolution authorizing an amendment to the city's intergovernmental agreement with Clackamas County Service District 1 related to access and development near the Kellogg Creek Water Treatment Plant. Is there any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Audience participation. This is the part of the agenda during which council will hear citizen statements regarding city business. Those wishing to speak must fill out a green speaker card available on the table in the hall and identify agenda item number 4, audience participation. As council has other business items on the agenda this evening, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Because the information provided during the public comment may be new to some councilors, the city manager will respond at the next council meeting to those comments that require follow-up. Before we begin, are there any follow-up reports from the March 6, 2018 audience participation? Ms. Ober.
There are actually a couple. So part of the discussion last week was about the tenant rights group. So we have included that as a part of the discussion going into the strategic plan for housing. We're bringing that before you in April, and then we'll be back for approval in May. So that'll give council a chance to weigh in on that when compared to other policies and policy objectives around achieving your housing affordability goal. We wanted to make sure that you could look at it in a spectrum of options. So it will be included, and you'll have an opportunity to weigh in at that time. There was also a discussion about parking enforcement officers and people's appreciation of them at the last meeting. We are doing the parking study right now. I've asked staff to look at whether or not increasing enforcement on Main Street would be needed in order to achieve those other goals. So we're looking at that component, and we'll have further discussion during the parking study. And we also discussed the bag ban and the styrofoam ban. I have staff looking at that still. We don't have a response yet, but we are looking at it. Okay.
And I'd like to add on the tenant rights piece that my hope is that we can pull together a roundtable of developers, property managers, tenants, advocates, and of course staff and council to have a really good in-depth discussion of all the parties so that we can come up with some solutions moving forward, because this is not an issue, a one and done kind of issue. There's going to be a lot of this, I think, at the next legislative session, and we're going to need to know where we stand and what we're advocating for at that level, and then whatever comes out of that, what we do with it.
Yes, and as a reminder, going into the strategic plan, we're actually doing focus groups where we're giving people a safe space to speak about this from a variety of different perspectives. Included in that will be a tenant group. There will also be a developer and owner group. So we're hoping to get some general information up front for all of you before you go through with those conversations with a roundtable.
So when I call your name, please come forward, state your name and city of residence. Is that all we ask for now? Mm-hmm. Used to be address.
Just city of residence.
Name and city of residence for the record. And you will have 3 minutes. When it starts flashing yellow, I think that means you have 30 seconds left. And when you hear a beeper, that's 3 minutes. All right. So we'll start with Kevin Darrow. Yeah, Darrow, sorry.
That's okay. Well, Mayor, City Council, thank you for your time. I'm a proud resident of Milwaukee. My name is Kevin Darrow. So as Milwaukee continues to grow, we've seen an increase in traffic on 7th, particularly between King and Harvey. So cars coming down King.
7th?
37th.
Okay, thank you.
37th, so as cars are coming down King, they can either continue down King and veer left and then get onto 32nd that way if they need to continue northbound, or they can take a right on 37th. So there's like been an increase in traffic that we've seen on that particular street. So with some new additions to our street over the past couple of years in the form of babies, I'm not alone in feeling nervous when we see cars zooming down the street. And so my question is, are there steps that we can take to help expedite getting speed humps like on 32nd and then also sidewalks? Are there things that we can do as residents of that particular street that can kind of help move things along?
You comfortable if I just work with them?
Sorry?
Are you comfortable if I just work with them? So if you
Sure,
can give
yes.
me your information, we'll sit down and talk.
Okay, great. Thank you.
32nd, you said?
37th.
37th.
7th.
And 32nd.
37th is the street that I'm referring to.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you said
We're
that.
using 32nd as an example of this.
That is an example for the speed humps.
okay.
But 37th is the street that we've seen an increase in traffic. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
for coming in. All right. Paul and Gina Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Can we present some pictures to you to our home for what I'm going to read so
Sure.
you can have a picture of what I'm talking about? And I'll make it fast.
Oops. Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Simpson, and this is Gina Simpson. We live in Milwaukee. Last year, I bought my childhood home from my aging mother with my family, who consists of 2 disabled adults and 1 who works for DHS with a physically and intellectually disabled adult. I petitioned for no parking signs due to limited and emergency access to my home is on a dead-end road off a cul-de-sac. Issues with the neighbor parking on that very narrow road Issues with the neighbor parking on the very narrow road could not and still aren't resolved, even with the signs, but thank you for the city for putting them. It gives us some support, and the Milwaukee police has been awesome. We altered our front yard to accommodate easy loading, unloading, and walking, and etc. A wheelchair is used by 1 family member and a cane for another who is partially blind and paralyzed. It has empowered all involved as we come and go throughout each day with what we did. Once the code enforcement officer inspected the place signs, he gave us a violation for altering our space. We explained to him why, and he responded with the very vague instructions claiming he didn't even know the house existed back there. When we brought up the handicap access needs, he shrugged his shoulders and had no idea what to say. Handed us a form with a computer-generated neighborhood that showed houses with sidewalks, which we do not have, and said he'd be checking on our progress. So I'm here today with the second violation and asking for your help with an exemption, as our situation is not black and white. We aren't asking for special privileges, but we are asking for access for our special family in our unique home placement. We have also contacted Disability Rights of Oregon seeking support as we want to resolve this issue, because it seems the code enforcement officer doesn't even acknowledge the needs of those who reside or visit my home.
What is the code violation that?
He said the area where it's at is in violation of exceeding the limit of
nature versus our parking access.
Yeah, he wants
Green
park
space.
dust or green
the green space, exactly.
Green space.
Yeah.
Okay, so percentage of green space on your.
Right.
But
And he also stated that he pretty much had control one way or the other, but because we're on a dead end and they don't really know that we're there, that had we not asked for the signs, which we need, he would have never even known that we were there. But he doesn't want to give special favoritism, which we're not asking for that. He never gave us any resolution, and we really need to have the access for all of our family members, including my clients that I bring to the home. So we kind of don't know where to go from here. So we took pictures of the access that we do have, which is a very narrow road. There's 2 homes on that street, and our neighbor is, of course, the one that we're having issues with, and we no longer speak. We have to call the police every time as we're dealing with this issue.
And my dad, I had to call. He fell. We had to call for emergency services. It was parked there. The gurney came from the cul-de-sac up to our home. And that's when the light, it's like, what about a fire or us that need emergency services, my disabled child? And so thanks to the city, they did put signs, and they will get a ticket eventually for violating it. But the access there, we are all alone on that dead end, and nobody can see us. I mean, it's like a little island in Milwaukee. And with what we did, we've been able to create access, and it's easy for my daughter, who's in a wheelchair, to get to the car, and our cousin that stays there, and a cane, because there's no sidewalks. He can't walk down the road, so he walks in our front there. And there's traction there, believe it or not, and he doesn't fall. Like when we had the yard, there was holes, and it was rocky. And it's made life better for us. And this is what we're facing right now.
Okay, thanks. And did you have?
Yeah, just a couple things. Typically, when our code enforcement team responds, it's because we've received a complaint. So I don't know what's actually happened in the background, and what I'd appreciate if council's comfortable is that I just do a little bit of additional investigating and have some conversations with both sides.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Do you have another copy of the photos for the record?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that it for audience participation?
That's it for number 4.
Okay. Great. All right. Next up, we have a public hearing. It's the disposition of city-owned property located on Main Street between Jackson Street and Harrison Street. There are 2 resolutions. The public hearing on the disposition of the city-owned property located on Main Street between Jackson Street and Harrison Street, initiated by the city, is called to order. The purpose of this hearing is to consider the disposition of real property owned by the city. Does any member of the City Council wish to announce any actual or potential conflicts of interest?
No.
I will note for the record that we are working in conjunction with Metro, and I'm a Metro employee, although I do not believe there's any potential or actual conflict of interest. I just want to make sure there's full disclosure.
Okay. Does any member of the audience wish to make any challenge to the council, to any council member's impartiality or ability to participate in this decision? Seeing none, we will have a staff report by Layla Aman. Yeah, start with that.
Do you want to drive, Layla?
Sure, I'll drive.
There's a nail under there.
Go come.
Yes. Thank you. All right, well, good evening, Mayor, councilors. Layla Aman, I'm your development manager for the City of Milwaukee, and I'm joined tonight by Patrick McLaughlin, who is also our partner at Metro for their Transit-Oriented Development Program.
Hello, everybody.
So we have 2 actions today for you to consider. We are asking, as part of the public hearing, to adopt a resolution that declares the Harrison and Main property surplus for the purpose of redevelopment, which would then authorize the city manager to move forward with the property solicitation jointly with Metro. We're also asking to adopt a resolution that describes the goals for the development of the Harrison and Main site. Just to give everyone some context of the site that we're talking about, it's actually directly across the street from us to the west. The site encompasses a full city block. Milwaukee's half encompasses the eastern portion of that block, and Metro owns the site that is along McLaughlin Boulevard. Just to give folks perspective, those in the community and in the room, we have long since owned this site jointly with Metro. So the city actually purchased the property in 1969. Metro purchased the property in 2005. It was once a Texaco gas station, and decommissioned it with the intent of jointly developing it with the city of Milwaukee. We entered into an intergovernmental agreement at that time to do a joint development, and during that period of time, Metro worked with DEQ to remediate the property and negotiated a prospective purchaser agreement for that site, so it is developable land. We did do a property solicitation just prior to the economic crash in 2008. The project was subsequently canceled, and then in 2010, the initial IGA with Metro expired. We got direction from council in 2015 as part of the Moving Milwaukee Forward to move forward with an RFQ process for that site. And so the city at the time worked with Metro to do a second intergovernmental agreement that basically updated the goals for that site. It had been quite a while at that time, and that was adopted in 2016. So today we are asking you to take the next step in this process, which is to declare the property surplus and adopt the goals for the site. There are some inherent goals that are part of the IGA that we have with Metro. So we have two separate resolutions. I'm going to go through the goals just in the interest of time that are relevant to the IGA, and then we have additional goals that are reflected by our vision and input that kind of reflect the values of where we are today. So those would be in addition to those. So the first goal really is maximize development potential. We want to see a building here that really takes our code to the fullest extent, that utilizes our bonuses. So we have a green building bonus, we have a housing bonus. We want to see a building here that really leverages the land that we have to build the most efficient building that we can. Secondly, we want to see something mixed use. Our code actually requires it, but it's also, ground floor activation is a primary component of street activation, and so we want to see that this site be something that's really contributing to the public realm and is part of our community. And we're looking at also housing and office uses, and I'll talk a little bit more about the housing later. And then finally, being that we are partnered with Metro's Transit-Oriented Development Program, we would like to see something transit supportive here. So something that embraces just beyond your typical building, but we want to see transportation demand management. We want to see creative solutions to providing transportation choice for both residents and then the folks that will be coming to the businesses that we hope to see there on Main Street. So there's a multitude of goals here that are reflected in our IGA, but I think also reflect the values that we want to see happen here. To tie it back both to Milwaukee specifically, these goals I think really do reflect some of the main actions that we have in our community vision. Improving our transportation system and providing safety and connectivity, and we can really do that through the built environment and how we develop this property. So that's a very important part of this project. We're also looking at creating complete neighborhoods, and we want to see a range of housing types and amenities. This project will help deliver on that. And then finally, one of our priority actions, our shorter term actions in the vision, are about incentivizing development of opportunity sites, and the Harrison and Main site is one of the key, I would say even one of the best sites in the region in terms of its location and proximity, both to Portland, but also to the light rail and its proximity for our residents as well. So we see this as being really a key site for moving forward Milwaukee's vision. I did want to acknowledge that during the IGA discussions that we got a lot of public comment. I actually wasn't here at the city at the time, but I printed out, and I'm sorry for wasting all the paper. I probably could have just looked at it, but it was it was a lot of paper and a lot of testimony about the parking and the farmers market location. And so I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up and talk with folks about how I believe that we are actively addressing these very valid concerns. The The first is parking. So staff is working with a parking expert right now to conduct a parking analysis, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we intend to have this project completed and moving forward with strategies prior to developing the property. And then also the farmers market location. This has been the home to our beloved farmers market for many, many years. And we have been collaborating very closely with the farmers market to design a festival street in South Downtown. And for those that aren't familiar with that terminology, what I'm referring to is the area on Main Street that is south of Washington and right before the Adams Street connector. So we'll be putting in infrastructure in place for that. We've been collaborating with them on how we can accommodate up to 100 booths. This is a very high-level design, but the city has set aside resources. I'm actually working with our engineering department to implement that so that we complete that work prior to next year's season opening. So that's our goal and our hope. But we have resources to build that infrastructure and are actively working towards that, and we're designing that work right now. In terms of parking, just to acknowledge, the site does serve as a surface parking lot, and it has for some time. Our site, the site that we own, has, I think since we purchased it, served as a parking lot. There are about 100 spaces there. Half of them are permit parking, as you can see outlined on Metro's side of the property. Our side of the property provides both 4-hour off-street parking as well as city employee parking. The parking strategy is currently underway, and in fact, we had surveyors out there today doing a 10-hour data collection survey, so looking at utilization of both the on-street system, and when I say on-street system, I'm referring to the parking spaces that are actually on the street, so our parallel and diagonal parking, and then the off-street system, which this would be part of that system, so they're surface parking lots. They did a 10-hour inventory. The first part of that project is a really comprehensive data collection and analysis of existing supply and demand. We've done this before, so we're building off of that, and the city's actually done an amazing job of tracking historically the last 10 years of parking utilization. So it's really valuable data. We're updating that. We're doing a much more thorough look at what utilization is, and then we're going to look at projecting what future supply and demand look like. So as our city starts to change, we see new development coming in. This is something I'm hearing consistently from our citizens, is concern about that, is understanding what is our existing supply, what do we expect to have happen in the future, and then we develop strategies around that that we can implement as a city. We're also doing stakeholder engagement and outreach. We'll be coming to you several times. We'll also be meeting with individuals as well as conducting some focus groups to get input from business owners, property owners, and other citizens about strategies that we can put in place both in the short term and then also how do we think about as we move forward as our city changes. And then we will implement that strategy. And just some high-level things related to that is how do we better manage our on-street system? 10 years ago, we didn't have permit parking or signed parking, and I think that that has made a big difference. I've certainly heard that from folks in our business community, but we also know they have very big concerns. And Councilor Beatty, who is not here tonight, has also brought this up as well. And so I think it's just important we acknowledge that we're cognizant of it, and we are working towards some meaningful strategies that the city can implement and work towards addressing change as it will happen. And also looking again as part of our project is looking at transportation demand management. So those are things like bus passes and having signage up and things like that so that people are much more encouraged to either bike, walk, or take transit. So again, just expanding choice for our residents, both today and those who will hopefully be here in the future. Just to give folks a sense of where we really are in the process, tonight the public hearing is really about declaring the property surplus. It's the first step in what will probably be a year-long, potentially more, process. We need to do a request for qualifications. So this action will then allow us to move forward with that jointly with Metro. That is a process in itself. We release an RFQ. We have a time period for which we allow folks to respond. We evaluate, we make a recommendation, and a selection of a development team. And then we will bring that back for approval. And then we negotiate the terms of a development agreement. So this is the beginning of a process. And I just want to make that clear both to the public and those here tonight that this is the starting point, and there'll be plenty of opportunities for folks to weigh in on what happens on this site. I do want to also point out that the parking strategy will be complete by July, and then we'll be talking about implementation after that. We intend for the farmers market again to be open in South Downtown by the spring of 2019 for their season. And then we do we project substantial completion of all the South Downtown work to be done fall of 2019. And that's also a concern that I've heard from business owners and from property owners is there's going to be a lot of activity, and so we should be really thoughtful about how we phase that activity. And so I think as a team, and we've talked, Metro is quite aware of this, that we have to be very sensitive to what the construction picture looks like in our city as we move forward with this. So in addition to the 3 goals that I already mentioned, these are the additional goals that we've added based on the community's vision and our discussions about the project. We're looking to reserve a minimum of 20% of the residential units to households earning up to 80% of the area median family income in this building for a period of at least 30 years. This is a very important goal, I think, for both the city of Milwaukee as well as for Metro. And so we're excited about this opportunity to bring a mix of income levels into our community on this really key site. Sustainability, again, another council goal, another community goal as well, is that we want to see a building here that utilizes the best in practice in terms of sustainable development, reducing energy consumption. These things all also contribute, I think, positively in terms of housing affordability as well, because it lowers the cost of living for residents, and you combine that with the transit orientation, you start to really reduce overall household costs. And then the other one is really the public realm. Again, this site is located right across the street from our beautiful park. It's right across the street from our city hall. It's really the heart of our city. And so we want this building to be an iconic building. It takes advantage of those amenities. It's a block away from the library. There's a lot of wonderful things that surround what's currently a parking lot. And so we want to see a building that really embraces its surroundings and is welcoming to the community. And again, just to tie it back to our vision, we really want to see Milwaukee as a model of resiliency and environmental stewardship. And I think building a building that's a high quality, sustainable building will help us deliver on that goal. We're implementing our programs and incentives. So we have a suite of programs and incentives that we have developed over the last year that will help us, I believe, deliver a really excellent project on this site. And then again, creating complete neighborhoods and offering that range of housing. This is really critical, particularly where we are in the arc of our development phase. It's really important we do that work now. So just to give you a summary, these are the eight main goals. I didn't talk about the public financing and project delivery, but these are things we want to see the highest amount of greatness we can get out of this project with the lowest amount of public investment possible. And then we also want to see a project that can be delivered expeditiously and soon. So with that, we have taken steps towards, this is a public hearing, so just to note for the public, we published a notice of this on March 13th in the Oregonian. We mailed property owners within 300 feet and sent those notifications on March 13th. Another part of what we have to do is do a market value appraisal, and we can do that after this action, but it must be done prior to a sale, and so that will be done and made available. So given that, the actions that we're requesting today are you to approve the resolution on surplus property and approve a resolution on goals. And Patrick and I are happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
I have a couple questions. You mentioned the concerns the public had and the substantial testimony that they provided earlier. As I understand it, the farmers market is on board with this, though, right? I mean, the South Plaza will be where they will be located, and they're happy about that. Is that right?
That is my understanding, and I'm hoping that Melanie Bennett is here today from CMI. She's one of the board members and came to provide testimony, so I'll allow her to speak for herself. But I would say that since I've been here, we have been collaborating very closely with them on the design, and I believe that, yes, that is true.
Okay. And then the second question I had, you mentioned the parking analysis that we're doing and the consultant that we've hired. Is that just clicking and looking at how many cars there are, or is there also outreach to the businesses and asking them about their thoughts? Does it involve any kind of business?
It does, indeed. So we have a portion of our study is really outreach. So we have interviews and focus groups, and we're working with Rick Williams Consulting, and the Downtown Milwaukee Business Association has graciously offered to work with us on doing a focus group with them specifically as well. So that's a big part of it, is really the outreach component. And then we are doing what happened today was a 10-hour survey. So we actually had surveyors out there inventorying license plates and doing rounds for 10 hours to collect data.
Okay. Thank you.
I have just one question, just for kind of clarification. So it's mentioned in the goals that there could be some floors of office space. But when we say office space, talking about in downtown Milwaukee, can that also be what we're kind of referred to recently as maker space, creative space, that type of thing? Or is it somebody sitting in an office who does or doesn't have customers coming in? Can you kind of clarify all that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say any kind of industrial-like use would probably not be a good fit in a building like this, but there are a number of different creative ways you can create creative office space. I think there's a number of different examples of shared office space. So I think we want to leave it open enough and hope for some creative, collaborative development partner that has some interesting ideas that we can look at. For our code requires active ground floor use, so it would depend on what the use is, whether that could exist on the ground floor, but certainly on the upper floors.
Mm-hmm. And if a developer chose to put a number of parking spaces, any kind of configuration of parking spaces, it could be a floor of parking, it could be inside kind of what do you call garden parking or whatever, but parking can't be accessed from or can't be visible from Main Street. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we can't access parking from Main, and we are hopeful that we will get some form of structured parking. It's part of the Transit-Oriented Development Program's goals is to support those things that are, call them cost premiums, so costs associated with higher density mixed use. So whether it's a structure or mechanical parking, that frees up more space for leasable space, for housing units, and things of that nature. So our expectation and hope is that we get a building that has some amount of structured parking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question about in the equitable housing goal. One thing that was a little new to me, because we talked about this being mixed income. And so the very last sentence, project partners are open to a land use program that includes multiple buildings, one of which is affordable. And I guess my only concern is that we're not envisioning that this would be sort of separate and not integrated with the rest of the development. That this be that it really feel and live like mixed income.
Yeah, and we would want it to operate that way. sometimes when you're dealing with certain kinds of affordable housing funding mechanisms, having separate structures can be advantageous. But I think that our goal would be to ensure that whatever is developed is that it's done in a way that it's a cohesive community. And I don't know, Patrick, if you want to add anything to
we've talked about this specifically when we brought it up, and the intent, much like the office use, was just to open it up for developers to think of creative ways to do it. And Layla's right; it's it's legally it's tricky when you try and structure affordable housing. So that was designed to make it a little easier for outside the box thinking, I think. But I think we would want to see at some point a cohesive approach to bringing both projects in essentially simultaneously and together.
And have access to the same amenities.
Exactly. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and like Patrick said, it's just kind of opening the opportunity for creativity, but you can certainly do mixed income deals. That has happened. I've worked on several, but we just wanted to have the opportunity to just keep it wide open and see what we got.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I won't ask the question, does anyone wish to comment? Because I know the answer to that. I will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through me. When you come to the testimony table, please state your name and city of residence for the record. Since we have other items on the agenda this evening, I encourage those speaking to confine their remarks to the proposed resolutions and avoid repetition and irrelevant information. Have we received any correspondence on this matter?
We have, and council has copies on the dais here. Correspondence from the Downtown Milwaukee Business Association via Kelly Keener, and an email from Denise Emerlin Baker.
I don't have those.
They're right here.
And
sorry. I have too many papers. Cool, thank you. All right. And we have these three, so 4 now. All right, so we'll start with Melanie Bennett. And again, it's 3 minutes, and when the flashing light starts, you have about 30 seconds left.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Gamba, City Council. My name is Melanie Bennett. I'm a resident of Milwaukee, and I'm also a board member of Celebrate Milwaukee Incorporated, or CMI, which is the parent organization of the Milwaukee Farmers Market, which is about to open its 20th season on May 6th, so I hope to see you all there. I'm here tonight speaking on behalf of the CMI board to voice our support for the property action on the Harrison and Main property. While it's never easy for anyone to leave their longtime home, we are excited to see continued growth and development in the downtown core. Adding more neighbors and more businesses is positive for all of us, and CMI supports that. CMI also appreciates how the city has worked with us to start developing a plan for our new location, and while it will be different, we know that it will feel like home very soon. In addition to supporting this property action, we'd also like to voice our support for adding additional parking to the project. We need to ensure that the people who want to visit, shop, and eat in downtown have a place to leave their car. While many of us, myself included, would walk, bike, or take transit, there are many who won't or who can't, and we want to have all of them come and visit us in downtown Milwaukee. If it's not convenient to get here, people won't come. I know I myself am guilty of making restaurant choices based on how close I can park. And while I know that parking is expensive to build, it will cost more if our downtown businesses suffer because customers can't get to them. Developing this specific lot means losing one of the major sources of parking in downtown Milwaukee, and as the CMI board, we hear a lot of complaints about the parking, and that is already, of course, we are occupying that space, but complaints about parking, it's probably the largest thing that we hear. Parking and, well, lack of farm fresh eggs are probably our 2 top complaints. So if you know any chicken farmers, organic, of course. So Thank you for hearing testimony, and we hope to see you all again at the opening of the market on May 6th and throughout the season. If you have any questions, please let me know, and CMI looks forward to continuing to work with the city and other partners as the various developments occur in downtown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles Mays.
Okay. My name's Charles Mays. I'm located here on Main Street at Casa de Tamales, Canby Asparagus Farm. First of all, I am against the parking lot being developed into a high-rise. Even though the city has surplus property. The young lady that just got through speaking, she said that she's on the committee for the farmers market, and we've been a member of that for 19 years, and it has been an absolutely wonderful farmers market. But I would have thought that the committee also would have talked to the vendors that have been there for the past 20 years, what their feedback was on the new location that they would like to design. I think that the council here should reconsider that piece of property and put it up to a vote for the public, because it's a surplus piece of property that we have, the city, and that the city should purchase, if that's what they have to do, purchase that property back from Metro so that they can develop that site into a plaza, naming it after our mayor and the council here. So now there's a nice thing to say that. And the reason I say that is because I'm going to say Mr. Mayor here has promoted himself on being a livable place, a friendly place, an environmental place, and a green space. And I think making this parking lot out here as a public plaza so that we could have the farmers markets there and have so many other events on that parking spot there would be just a wonderful additive to the city of Milwaukee. In regards to the park that the young lady mentioned, I'm sorry that we continue, and I continue bringing up the park. It is a pretty park if they would maintain it. For 3 years, that park has been nothing but an eyesore. It's an embarrassment to the city, because when you're going down there, what are you looking at? You're looking at a very ugly park, not maintained. And we wish to build another park. Before we go forward with anything, I think we should take care of that park to make it a showcase for when people are driving down McLaughlin. They see that park, they're going to want to park there, they want to go in there and sit down and have a picnic or something like that there. But in regards to this plaza here, once again, I think the best thing for it to do is to let the public vote on it to see if they would like to fund that for a plaza, if they would like, or for a housing place. If they choose housing, then go ahead and do it, you know. But I just think that we're wasting our money and our time on this survey this survey that, and all of the above. I mean, I think somebody said that the property down here where the pizza parlor was, that fell through, that the bowling alley was going to be sold and the pizza place was going to be sold and there was going to be some development there, but apparently it fell through, so, but I'm not sure. But once again, you know, I'd really wish that you guys would reconsider that parking lot and making it into a plaza for all people.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Charles. Okay. Tanya Pert-Nichols. Sorry if I got that wrong.
No, it's all good.
Hello, City Council Mayor. My name is Tanya Pert-Nichols. I am a small business owner in Old Town Milwaukee. And I'm here for myself as well as on behalf of some of the other small downtown businesses that couldn't be here this evening. The concern is regarding the new or proposed housing development coming in across from City Hall and the subsequent issues that parking issues that it's going to bring. A number of years ago, I moved my business to Milwaukee from the Pearl District to downtown Portland. I'd been there for 7 years. The move was specifically due to lack of the city planning regarding the increase in the housing developments, increased population, crime, traffic, and parking for the business owners and their clients. It is, the city of Portland had a theory that they wanted to have everybody go onto light rail and public transportation to get around, but unfortunately what happened was that it drove a lot of the businesses out of the area due to lack of parking for their clients. Having a small and safe community and access to parking in Old Milwaukee was a big part of why I chose to move here. I love Milwaukee and everything that it's been. I'm part of the North Clackamas Chamber of Commerce, and I do First Fridays, and I'm really enjoying Milwaukee and what it is, especially the farmers market is a great thing. In my business, I am a tattoo artist, but what I do is I work on mastectomy clients, burn victims, scar camouflage, as well as do repairs and new things too. My business is in the McLaughlin building. I'm upstairs. I have no signage. It's a private appointment-only studio. And so not having, and a lot of my clients come in from all over the state of Oregon, from Washington, from California, and fly in from all over the country to have me work on them. They really need to have parking within proximity, especially not limited to 2 hours due to the nature of my work. I can't have someone getting up in the middle and having to move their car, especially blocks away because of the block rule enforcement. Getting rid of the 4-hour parking in the municipal lot is gonna kind of reap havoc on the availability of the parking. My clients are already having to start moving farther away. I'm, get parking issues sometimes. And then also being a small business owner, we have to bring in supplies. We have to do all kinds of things that is good to be able to park within proximity when we have to do that. So I am just wanting to know what the city has proposed in the virtual elimination of the long-term parking that will result in the development. There are also a number of developments coming in around the surrounding areas of Portland that are going to bring in hundreds of new people that I'm not sure what the parking planning is doing for that, but it's not always reasonable for people to come in and take light rail. And it was mentioned earlier that that people do make decisions based on how close they can park. And I think it's a great idea to be able to take light rail and public tran, but it's not always feasible. So I think it needs to really be looked at the parking impact of what's going to happen here. And so I'm in opposed, but thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ed Parecki.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and citizens of Milwaukee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I come here tonight to oppose the project that you are proposing to do here. My first concern is whether the council is adhering to the code. It's very interesting that 10 years ago there was a code in place and the same kind of project was proposed, and it was determined that the code could not be met. So what does the council do? They write a new code to make sure that they can meet the code. And after carefully reading through the code, it turns out that you guys are not meeting it anyway. First of all, I would like to know what constitutes a property to be surplus. Has anybody ever even thought about what surplus means? You don't need the property, you have too much of it. Why is it surplus? Right now it's being used as a public parking. It's also the heart of the city with the market that is very popular for the last 20 years. Everybody sees that as the reason Milwaukee exists. Somebody mentioned in one of these slides that downtown Milwaukee, this piece of property is the heart of the city. And what you're doing with bringing a project like this that's going to be at least, if you notice, at least 5 stories high, not 4 stories like the old code used to be, but at least, which means it's open-ended. It could be up to 10 stories if you meet the code, if you read the code. What you're doing is you're ripping the heart of the city, and you cannot resuscitate that part of the city once you develop this property. I heard I heard Charles say that Charles made a good point, and I just lost it. But the plaza idea is good, and it needs to be looked at more carefully. The second thing is the sale of this property in the public interest of the citizens? And it's the citizens that need to decide what to do with this property. And I urge you to let the citizens make a vote on this property. If you do find it that is surplus, then it's open, should be open for the citizens to make a decision. Do you want to develop it, or do you want to keep it as a plaza, or do you want to keep it as parking? It is the heart of the city. Don't take the heart away from the citizens. Everybody that sees Milwaukee sees it because it's a nice small town. If you bring this humongous building up 5 or 6 stories, it's no longer a small town, and it's going to be just like the Pearl District, or just like Division Street, or just like Selwood. We don't want to be like them. We want to be unique, and I urge you to vote against this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
That's all the cards I have on this one. Is there anybody else that wanted to speak on this issue? All right. Does staff have anything to add specifically to address questions raised during the testimony?
I would just make a couple comments. I appreciate the comments about the parking and just want to reemphasize that we are looking at that. And then the other is that we will certainly be staying within the code. What we have asked for in terms of the goals are reflective of our existing code.
And would our existing code allow a 10-story building?
You would have to apply for a variance, and my guess is, I'm not going to answer that, but my guess is probably not.
So our existing code allows for how many stories?
Our existing code allows by right up to 5 stories if you utilize the density bonuses.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff?
I don't have any.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, if there are no further questions, I will entertain a motion to close the public testimony portion of the hearing.
I move that we close the public testimony portion of the hearing.
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. The public testimony portion of the public hearing on the disposition of the city-owned property located on Main Street between Jackson Street and Harrison Street is hereby closed. Is there council discussion?
I'll start. I appreciate that people come out and testify, and we always want to hear from citizens. I do not share the vision of keeping this as a parking lot in the heart of the city. It's underdeveloped. I mean, at least one person mentioned potentially a plaza, but a parking lot I don't think is the vision that I want to see for my downtown Milwaukee. That's not where I think it should be. So I support the resolution to make this surplus and then to move forward with the goals that we've discussed. I think it's an underutilized area. And I also think that we do need to be very cognizant of the concerns that have been raised regarding parking issues. There's our 100 spaces. We are looking at how that will be structured. We had discussion from staff that we're looking at structured parking opportunities. We're conducting the parking analysis. So I think that will be looked at. The idea that this is an issue for the farmers market, I'm sorry, I don't share that. This downtown, if you've looked at the South Plaza area and what we're doing there, and if you've seen the designs, it's going to be wonderful. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be a great place to have a farmers market. Better than sitting on a parking lot, I feel like. So I completely support this moving forward.
I'd like to address the notion that the code changes were made by the city and not part of a very large public outreach process, because it was. Moving forward, Milwaukee was a huge process, and it took years. And there were hundreds of people who participated in developing the new code to encourage higher use, better use, including the standards and the code now that allows us to plan for a project that we've outlined in these goals. So I just want to make sure that as we go through this process, we recognize and we appreciate the work that's been done since at least 2012 on developing what this might look like, because it was many years of work by lots of people to inform this process.
Fair. That's true.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with basic comments each of you have made. I certainly I would want the citizenry to know that we also are concerned about parking, and so it's an issue for us as we move forward with this. As you see, we're doing a parking study, parking strategy. There are various kinds of things going on, and nothing has come to us at this point in time as to just what exactly a building would look like and what it would have in it, and whether it would have 1 or 2 floors of parking or not, or whatever. So there will be many opportunities along the road for the citizens, as well as those of us in the decision-making realm, to be able to have input into what a building on that site might look like.
And some of those are really exciting possibilities. I mean, I think the ideas around shared parking and finally, a collaborative parking management agreement for downtown and alongside of our other business districts. I think that there's not only a lot of opportunity, but for public engagement, but a lot of opportunity for new ideas and to provide even better strategy and parking options for our residents and our visitors.
And I don't think, according to our code, that there's any possibility of a building being taller than 5 stories. If I remember how that's written, I mean, you get the bonuses to be able to go to 5 stories by being sustainable or green, and by having residential. Density. And it must have retail on the bottom floor, and could have office spaces of some kind within it. I believe that's correct, right? Yeah, so.
I agree. My memory of that code is that you actually can't get a variance to go above 5 stories. That's the one thing that was locked in, but I could be misremembering. I'm old. I do that. I think the downtown of Milwaukee has struggled in many ways for years. When I moved here, it was all but a ghost town. There was very little retail in downtown. As more people have moved here, as other amenities like the light rail have taken place, businesses have done better. More businesses have sprouted up. Mr. Preki brought in a whole building full of businesses. I think what we heard during the visioning process from a lot of people was an interest in having an even more vibrant downtown, having even more amenities, more places to go out at night, more shops. And the only way we get that is if there are more residents in the downtown. So as a strategic concept for how you create a lively downtown, having 4 stories of residence over ground floor retail is a good one. It also increases the tax base for the city, and I know that everyone out there seems to think the city is made of money. Having looked at budgets now 3 times, I can tell you it's not, and that there is a financial cliff in the future for the city of Milwaukee if either the tax codes in Oregon don't change or we don't continue to grow. And as we are a landlocked city, the only way we have to grow is up. So for all those reasons, I think this is an important project. I think it's a catalytic project for the city, and I intend to move forward with both of these resolutions tonight and continue the process. I also believe that the farmers market, the new farmers market location, is actually a nicer location in many ways. I can remember when we were getting testimony about the parking lot the first time, people would say, we're going to lose our views of the river. And I actually said to one of them after the meeting, I said, come show me the views of the river from the parking lot. And we walked out there the next day and they looked and they went, well, you can't actually see the river, but you can see the trees down by the river. From the South Downtown spot, you can actually see the river.
Yes.
And wasn't the South Downtown Plaza always imagined as the future home?
Right. When Jim Bernard started the farmers market, his one concern about using that parking lot was that people would fall in love with the place rather than the thing of the farmers market, and that the original concept for it being in the South Downtown would then go away. So it was always intended to move there, which just took us a lot longer than anybody ever thought it would. So, anybody else have anything?
Well, the other thing that I would say is that this also brings more housing, and that's one of our council's goals. And I think it's unfortunate to me, anyway, that so much of this testimony is focused on parking and less on housing. And I think housing is important. It's crucial. It's a regional concern. It's certainly a concern in Milwaukee. And yet we're spending what I think is an inordinate amount of time discussing parking when we can solve that problem a heck of a lot easier than we can solve the housing crisis.
That's a good point.
Yep. So I would entertain a motion.
Can I say one thing on parking?
No, sorry, testimony is over. Thank you.
I move to approve the resolution to declare the real property owned by the City of Milwaukee located on Main Street between Jackson and Harrison, tax lot ID 11E35AA00900, surplus for the purpose of redevelopment, and to authorize the city manager to move forward with a property solicitation.
I second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the resolution to declare the real property owned by the City of Milwaukee located on Main Street between Jackson and Harrison, tax lot ID 11E35AA00900, surplus for the purpose of redevelopment, and to authorize the city manager to move forward with a property solicitation. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. It passes unanimously.
Do you have another motion?
All right. So we need a second motion on the goals.
I move to approve the resolution setting goals for the development of the Harrison and Main site.
I second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the resolution setting goals for the development of the Harrison and Main site. Is there any further discussion on that?
None.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. That also passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Monroe Street Neighborhood Greenway update, and this is simply for discussion purposes. I don't believe we have any kind of a decision tonight. So this will be introduced by our engineering director, Chuck Eaton. And
good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council.
Not yet.
Do you have it loaded up, Scott? Yeah. No, that's a staff report. It's a staff report. PowerPoint right there, presentation.
Gotcha.
My name is, of course, Charles Eaton, the engineering director. Matt Dolata is with me. He's our consultant from DKS, who has done all the study work. Their firm has. If you may recall, Council adopted the Monroe Street Neighborhood Greenway Plan back in late 2015. One of the conditions or sections of that adoption was that we perform additional traffic analysis and studies related to the plan. It's actually condition number 4. That's what we're here basically to give you the presentation of the findings of that additional information that was required as part of that. It's, as you'll see, it's been an exhaustive thing. If you opened up the appendix, I've heard it's 1,000 pages, but hopefully it was, if you did get into there, it was worthwhile on the appendix. So that's kind of where we are. In this year's budget, we actually had for this plan and testing the diverters, which is also in the adopted resolution. And that is kind of where we're at today, is to seek whether or not we should proceed after you hear the report today with the testing. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and let him get through the meat of the presentation and the actual draft report.
Thanks, Chuck, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today about this report. So I'm just going to kind of run through what we did and why we're here. So there's been 2 plans for Monroe Street developed, one by the county and one by the city. They have a lot of things in common, but some kind of key differences. The Monroe Street Neighborhood Greenway concept plan, the city's plan is west of Linwood, and the county's plan is east of Linwood. There's kind of the shared objective of just creating a safe travel space for people who biking and walking, as well as people driving along Monroe Street. The city's concept plan is really focused on developing the neighborhood greenway concept that includes traffic calming, diverters, and then also the off-street path that we'll talk about a little bit more. The county's plan is a little bit different. They don't explicitly have the objective of the neighborhood greenway, but they are also looking for an active transportation route so that there's a consistent bicycle and pedestrian facility between downtown Milwaukee all the way over to 205. So, like I said, there were already 2 plans, so why am I sitting in front of you? This plan is really intended to look at the traffic impacts in more detail, and it's intended to integrate those city and county plans by looking at the kind of the whole corridor between downtown and Fuller. So one of the key concerns that's been raised by the community in the past was just, well, what are going to be the traffic impacts of this? What's going to happen to my neighborhoods? What's going to happen to study intersections? So that's really the question we're trying to answer here. So let's talk for a second about daily traffic volume. So to be a neighborhood greenway, there's motor vehicle traffic volume targets for that. So that's 1,500 vehicles a day. That's kind of the primary number that we're trying to get to with these concept plans. 3,000 vehicles is another number. That's fine for a short segment. So you can tolerate up to 3,000 vehicles and still call yourself a neighborhood greenway. It just needs to be on a relatively short segment. Less than 1,000 vehicles per day, that's kind of the preferred target. That's really where you want to be. That's where you get to kind of a local neighborhood street level of volume, or a relatively busy local street, but down towards that level. That's kind of the target. That's the target Portland identifies. So getting in that 1,500 or less range is really one of the primary objectives that we were trying to achieve. So this graphic here, I'll explain all these colors in a second, but the idea is, what are the volumes on Monroe Street today? We kind of talked about that 1,500 number. So the green pieces, that means you're doing great, you're good to go, you're under 1,000 vehicles per day. The blue pieces, you're doing pretty good. You're under that 1,500 number that I just talked about. 2,000 to 3,000, again, under 3,000, or I jumped through. Yellow and orange are kind of in that in-between range where you're within range, and you'd probably be okay for a short segment, but you don't want your whole corridor to be at that level. Above 3,000, that's really doesn't work as a neighborhood greenway. So this is your starting point. You have a few pieces, particularly on the east end where you kind of have the Monroe Street gap that's not open to motor vehicle traffic. That's fine, doing great, but most of the corridor is above that target volume. So that's kind of the reality of today, Monroe Street. It's not just plug in and work as a neighborhood greenway. There's traffic volume there. So let me talk for a second about our traffic analysis, what we did to look at that. The technical term for what we developed was a mesoscopic travel demand model. We're really honing in on this study area. This is a model that was developed specifically for your study area. All the detail of all the through streets, all the stop signs, traffic lights, all that information is in there. So it's pretty detailed. We used 74 traffic counts to develop this data and calibrate the model to that. And we feel pretty good about the level of analysis and the detail that went into this. We looked at 21 different scenarios, different combinations of components of the neighborhood greenway. We did detailed traffic operations analysis at 28 of the study intersections. And as Chuck said, please do not print the 1,000-page appendix, but I do encourage you to look at it. So our primary kind of performance measures, again, it's the intersection traffic operations, how much delay are people going to experience in these different scenarios. The daily volumes on the Monroe Street corridor, are we getting to these target volumes that we're trying to reach to get to the Greenway? And then a key concern, I think, is neighborhood diversion. What happens when King and Railroad and other roadways are busy? How are the neighborhoods going to be impacted? I think it's a very understandable consideration. So this is really a good tool to evaluate those kind of things. So I talked about the 21 alternatives that we looked at. So we kind of did this in two different rounds. We started kind of with each of the individual pieces that are in these concept plans and kind of tested them kind of one by one to see what each one does and which are more effective. Then we started kind of combining them into different concepts or refinements in a second round of analysis. So the pieces we looked at are the traffic calming treatments that were defined in the concept plans. Then we look at diverters, and we were kind of looking at 4 different locations at 224, at 37th Avenue, at 42nd, and at Linwood. Those were the 4 diverters we were looking at. We also, and this was more of a concern from the county's perspective, but looked at also opening up that Monroe Street gap, not only to bicycle and pedestrian traffic, but also motor vehicle traffic. So those were the pieces that we analyzed. And so I just want to give some upfront findings that we had, on the technical side of what we found. So in terms of looking at individual components, the Linwood diverter and the traffic calming treatments were both kind of the most highly effective ones. They had the most kind of widespread impact in getting vehicles off of Monroe Street. In general, it was pretty difficult to achieve those neighborhood greenway volume targets on Monroe Street between Oak Street and 42nd Avenue. That's where you have the most traffic, and that's where it's the biggest challenge to find a kind of an alternative route. One of the key things I think is if you want a neighborhood greenway, none of these things alone are going to get you there. You need a combination of treatments. And in order to reach those greenway volume targets on Monroe Street itself, throughout the corridor, you kind of need all 4 diverters. And I think one of the things that previous to this analysis was that maybe 3 of them would be fine. You wouldn't necessarily need both the 37th and the 42nd diverter, but our analysis said if you want to get down to those volumes, you're going to need both on Monroe Street. The signal, another thing that we kind of found that was sort of new information was that the signal at Harrison Street and 42nd Avenue, which was already in your transportation system plan, but this process maybe could expedite the need for that's really a helpful way to, when you divert people away from Monroe Street, to get them to Harrison Street, not as much in the neighborhood. So it's a pretty effective piece of the recommended concept plans. So where we landed, we didn't necessarily recommend one or the other in this traffic analysis report. We kind of found 2 concepts that we think work. This is generally pretty consistent with the previous concept plans that have been developed. So it's essentially down to 2 kind of alignments, and I think that's kind of one of the key choices in front of you. They're mostly similar, again, with the exception of the area between Oak Street and Home Avenue. So the recommended concept is to have traffic calming kind of throughout the Greenway, to have a diverter at 224, and then you choose whether you're going to have go along Washington Street, use the path along the railroad tracks to get to Washington Street, or whether you're going to go on Monroe Street. And if you go on Monroe Street, there's kind of 2 additional diverters there, those ones on 37th and 42nd. One of the other findings was if you go with the Monroe Street alignment, you're going to divert some traffic onto 37th Avenue, and that would likely trigger some need for some sort of improvement at 37th and Harrison as well. So that would likely be another traffic signal that would be needed as a result of the Monroe Street alignment concept. So this is that same daily traffic volume graphic that I started off with in existing conditions. So as you see here, there's a lot more green than we had in the baseline. So you're pretty much reaching your targets, and you're doing a great job. The only piece that really isn't there is, again, sorry, this is the Washington Street alignment. This would have more than 3,000 vehicles on west of 42nd. So you're realigning people who are using bikes to the south, and you have more traffic remaining on Monroe Street, and you're staying above 3,000 over there.
So that's just a diverter at 42nd?
This is the Washington Street alignment concept has a diverter only at the highway, 224, and at Linwood Avenue. There's no diverter at 37 and no diverter at 42nd. Yeah. Huh.
That's another change from the original adoption. They thought they would need one of the diverters even with the Washington Street, and our study shows that it did not.
So this is the Monroe Street alignment, not using the off-street path, but just staying on Monroe Street throughout. This does include the 37th and the 42nd diverter, both. So you're doing pretty good. You're below that 1,500 target almost entirely through the corridor. West of 37th, it's still a challenge, but the segment that you're above 1,500 is relatively short, so it still will work as a neighborhood greenway. So from our perspective, both of these work, but just to kind of, again, compare back to what you have today, the Washington Street alignment, the traffic volumes you'd have with the Washington Street alignment, and the traffic volumes you'd have with the Monroe Street alignment. And so, again, green and blue is kind of hitting your target. Orange and yellow is you're on the borderline, and red is kind of above the target volume. So this traffic that's moving, where does it go? What happens? Well, I'll talk about neighborhood diversion in a second, but first I just want to give you an idea of your kind of the busiest intersections in this kind of study area and what kind of impact this is going to have on those. At the highway, there's some traffic diversion shift, but really at the Monroe Street intersection that's there today, that diverter, there's not really a lot of volume at that Monroe Street intersection turning onto it. There's a lot of through volume on the highway, of course, but so the shifts are relatively small. So you are increasing the travel delay at those intersections. So this is the number of seconds on average that you're waiting at that intersection during the PM peak hour. So right now, you're at 40 seconds on average at one intersection, 52 at another, and in this scenario, you're really just changing it a little bit. There's just a little bit of noise. Basically, these are really big intersections that handle a lot of traffic volume, and this shift is going to be relatively small at those intersections. Harmony Road, Railroad Avenue, Linwood Avenue, I think, anyone who lives in this community, I think, knows that that's a very busy intersection. Again, it handles a lot of volume, relatively small impact as a result of this. Where you'd see more of an impact is that both of these concepts shift a lot of traffic volume over to Harrison and King Road. So King and Linwood Avenue is kind of one of the busier intersections along that corridor, and it would increase the delay at that intersection. King would get busier, but both of these concepts are essentially kind of the same in terms of the level of magnitude. It'd be 15 additional seconds or 16 additional seconds at that intersection. Again, one of the key differences between the Washington Street alignment and the Monroe Street alignment is this Harrison and 37th Avenue. That's kind of an additional mitigation that you'd have with the Monroe Street alignment that you wouldn't have with the Washington Street alignment, and that's because of the diverter at 37th. It keeps more traffic up there. So this graphic, and it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to show this in a few different slides, but what this is intended to be is the level of diversion that would happen onto streets as a result of these concept plans. So again, we're comparing this Monroe Street alignment and this Washington Street alignment in two graphics. So the dark purple line is the higher impact. So this is 100 or more additional cars driving on that roadway during the PM peak hour. The kind of in between lighter purple lines, this means you're going to see about 40 to 100 additional vehicles in the PM peak hour. And the white lines are kind of the lower impact where you're going to see less than 40 vehicles. Anywhere else, our traffic model is saying you're going to have essentially a negligible change on any of these neighborhood streets.
It's interesting to me that Linwood doesn't seem to pick up much, given the, not our half, but more the Clackamas half. Because the only way, as I understand our diversion concept, that you get into Monroe going east is to come from Railroad, right? Because it's a right in, right out. So the only way you get into that whole neighborhood off of Monroe is to come from Railroad up Linwood and then turn right. So it surprises me that it doesn't push more traffic onto Linwood.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing most of the diversion happening onto King and Railroad with those parallel east-west routes. So there's definitely some changes in circulation, but in terms of the overall increase in volumes, it's primarily to King, those other east-west routes.
The other thing to remember is the base volumes of Monroe itself. They're really large down at the 37th area. It gets substantially smaller by the time you cross Linwood. There isn't actually that many cars using the county section of Monroe compared to what's using our section of Monroe.
Okay. So I'm not showing any decreases on this. I'm only showing the increases in traffic.
So why do you think it's pushing more traffic onto Fuller?
Yeah, I think that's kind of probably part of the east-west routing. So some people, I mean, the scale of traffic there is not that huge. It's 40 to 100. This is all kind of relative. But I guess in that part, maybe.
One other thing this study does include is the Boyer opening of the Boyer connection.
Includes
so it's already in there because the county says that's a done deal. They are opening that. So this includes that Boyer connection between Fuller and 82nd.
Oh,
yeah.
That makes a huge difference right there.
That's a good point.
I can see a big difference on Fuller since they opened, was it Causey, down to Fuller. So I can understand what that.
And we do have somebody with the county here with us if you have more questions related to the county side. So
we will.
Yeah, we should say that that's a good point, Chuck. That our kind of analysis here is for 2020, so we're trying to look a few years out ahead and then include that Boyer extension. Yeah. So let me zoom in to make this a little bit better to see. And so these two gray boxes, inside of that is really where you see the big difference between the two concepts. Outside of that, it's pretty much the same impacts between these things, which kind of makes sense. That's where you kind of have the sensitivity, right? But this kind of shows, which neighborhoods are potentially going to be impacted. So on the west, kind of west of the highway, 28th and 29th, we saw a little bit of diversion potential, not very much. Again, there's the shifts at that Monroe Street intersection at 224 are really not that big. So we thought that looked pretty good overall. Kind of moving to the east, most of the shifts, again, were over to Railroad and King. We saw some shifts over onto Stanley there as well. Linwood did see more volumes, but not a ton. I understood that residents of the Queen and Jack Street neighborhoods also had some concerns, and in some ways this result kind of validates it in a way of saying, yeah, we do think there might be a little bit of cut-through traffic through it. But the scale of it is again, relatively small. We're talking about 10 to 40 vehicles in the PM peak hour. That's still well within the range of a typical local street would experience. Now, that doesn't mean the neighbors aren't going to notice it, but the scale is relatively small. It's not like they're going to become a collector street or a major thoroughfare. So I think that's an important kind of finding of the study. So let's get into the pieces that are kind of significantly different. So on the left here, I'm showing the diversion of the Monroe Street alignment, and on the right side, the Washington Street alignment. If you look in this area between 37th and 42nd Avenue, you have a really good grid, and that's great until you put in diverters nearby, and then and traffic diverts onto your streets, because it's relatively easy to do so because you have great connectivity through here. And so what you're seeing is that Washington Street and Jefferson Street are getting, significantly more traffic, and that means they're not going to function anymore like a local street would be. When you get up above, 40 to 100 vehicles during the PM peak hour, in addition to what you already have today, that you're not really necessarily functioning very well as a local street anymore. And that may be okay, but that's something I, want you all to be aware of. So that's an important...
Doing the Monroe Street alignment pushes, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding this. Doing the Monroe Street alignment pushes 40 to 100 more cars, and this is during
the PM peak hour.
PM peak hour onto Washington Street.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, because we have diverters at both 37th and 42nd in order to make it below 1,500 cars for bicyclists to be able to use that street.
Okay. So if you want to achieve the target volume on Monroe Street throughout the corridor, you need both the 37th and the 42nd diverter, and the 37th and 42nd diverter end up creating these neighborhood impacts to traffic. Still some traffic diversion happening in the Washington Street alignment, but a lot less, and that's because you have fewer diverters in the busiest part of Monroe Street from a traffic perspective. So first I'm going to talk about the kind of common finding between both these alignment concepts, what we found. Both of these work. They can both achieve the objectives of the neighborhood greenway from a daily volume perspective. We did recommend new traffic signals as part of this, the Harrison Street and 42nd Avenue. Again, that supports diversion going to a major roadway where you want it to go to. We found that it was a pretty key part of this project. The Oak Street, Monroe Street, Railroad Avenue signal that was also identified as part of the concept plan is also supportive of this. The diverter at 224, I kind of talked about that a few times, has relatively minor effect on traffic operations, and obviously 224 is kind of a major barrier for bicycle and pedestrians. The diverter at Linwood Avenue, which is also paired with a pedestrian signal as part of the concept plans. It's another key piece that really does support the neighborhood greenway objectives.
Were there other concepts looked at for the Linwood-Monroe intersection besides just the diverters and the rapid flashing beacon or whatever that's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, we took the diverter out. The diverter was included in some scenarios and not included in other scenarios. We also did kind of a sensitivity test at the end of both of these concept plans and did them with and without the Linwood diverter to see if you still needed it with the traffic calming and the other things, and we found that you actually did. I mean, it was pretty close, but you did need it to get below 1,500 in that area. So we were doing sensitivity tests all along in those 21 scenarios to see if it did work. Are you referring to the type of crossing?
I guess the concern I have around that intersection is the visibility is not great, particularly if you're going west on Monroe, trying to get across Linwood. You're pretty blind on your left, and not great looking right either.
If you're going east,
and people are moving fast.
Yeah.
At least often they're moving fast. So even though there's a diverter there, I don't see that necessarily slowing people down.
Going north-south.
Going north-south on Linwood. So that's...
The concept plan includes a full pedestrian signal. These are red lights, not flashing yellows.
Not flashing.
So when you hit the button, you get stop on Linwood.
And that's at what corner?
At Linwood and Monroe. So if you're crossing Linwood on Monroe in the concept plan, it's a hawk. It's a full stop. So you have to stop.
And bikes will trigger that too with the sensor?
Right. So it's not an RFB type where it's, the cautionary type yellow. It's an actual pedestrian signal.
Red light. Okay. That's better. Cool.
And then we also looked at opening the Monroe Street gap not only to pedestrian cyclists, but also to vehicle traffic as kind of the parallel route over to Thompson over there. And that was, again, kind of driven by the county's piece of this. That was something that they were interested in. And we also ran a sensitivity test with and without that gap being open to see what the impacts were. We don't recommend that be open to motor vehicles just so that you have a consistent neighborhood greenway, acceptable volumes all the way along Monroe Street. Again, the primary diversion routes we're seeing here would be King Road, Harrison Street, and Railroad Avenue. Generally, west of 37th Avenue and east of 42nd Avenue, outside of that little gray box that I put up there, neighborhood diversion impacts are pretty minimal. They're generally pretty small. The piece where you do see the sensitivity is within 37th and 42nd Avenue. So now boiling it down to kind of the key differences between these recommended concept alignments and, perhaps the decision before you. If you go with the Monroe Street alignment, there's 4 diverters there in total. The Washington Street alignment has 2. The Monroe Street alignment also has more cut-through traffic, as that a couple slides back, that graphic kind of indicated less cut-through traffic with the Washington Street alignment. Monroe Street would be a more direct route for people on bikes, and Washington would be less so. If somebody does continue to bike on Monroe Street, which some people, people ride differently, different people behave differently. They'd have about, in the Monroe Street alignment, they'd have about 250 feet with more than 3,000 vehicles per day. In the Washington Street alignment, there would be a lot more traffic on Monroe Street, so for people who choose to bike along there, it'd be more significant. A mitigation difference, again, that Harrison and 37th Avenue signal I talked about a few times, you need it in the Monroe Street alignment, you don't with the Washington Street alignment. That affects your costs of the project, so your costs would be a little bit higher, for the Monroe Street alignment concept. So we just kind of tried to boil it down with this little infographic to kind of the key differences between these two concepts.
And one thing I just thought that we actually missed on this is that in the Monroe Street, we have 4 traffic signals, and in the Washington Street, we have 3 traffic signals. So it's another complete traffic signal.
And traffic signals tend to run
250 to 350,000 each.
I have a question. You said that the second or third to the bottom where it says 250 feet and 2,400 feet, you're saying if someone continued on Monroe, that's what they would experience?
Correct. This would be for a rider who would be picking, assuming they want to travel directly on Monroe and they're comfortable mixing with a larger volume of traffic, this is how long they would travel. Because some people will choose the neighborhood greenway because it's more comfortable, but some people might be more aggressive and more comfortable and might go along there. So to be clear, if you stayed on the neighborhood greenway route, you wouldn't really be affected by this. This is just on Monroe Street. How many feet
that's what I wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we can open it up to questions, but first, Chuck, do you want to talk about what you see as the next steps for this?
Yeah, so there's a couple basic questions I have in the staff report of council is one, if I did actually make a recommendation, and one of the reasons I did feel comfortable making a recommendation at this particular stage is mainly a cost-benefit ratio analysis. The additional signals, the price I just quoted was actually just the construction of the signal. Any of these intersections are going to require right-of-way acquisition also in order to put signals on. The addition of having to potentially put a signal at 37th and Harrison is a significant challenge right at the crest of the hill. That would be a tough mitigation to deal with under the Monroe Street alignment. And actually under the Monroe Street alignment, we're doing the most damage to the neighborhood infrastructure in my mind, and the fact that we're moving all the traffic onto the neighborhood grid in that area between 37th and 42nd. So that's why I felt comfortable making the recommendation that we go with the Washington Street alignment for the bicycle traffic and keep the cars on Monroe, which is where they've historically been. With that, though, originally we were supposed to be testing some diverters. Our test sites were the diverter at 37th or 42nd. This finding gives us new information that neither of those diverters would be warranted or needed with the Washington Street alignment, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to test it. Unless you thought there would be some value somewhere else. But I just didn't want to necessarily see us spending that budgetary money if we didn't need to. So those are kind of the two things we're looking for is kind of a little bit of direction on how to proceed, because we were going to proceed with the test next. And
well, I can remember saying clear back when we very first did this process that I was not particularly in favor of testing diverters and then taking the diverters out and then 2 years later, 4 years later, whatever, putting the diverters back, because all you manage to do with that operation is to piss off the neighborhood twice instead of just once. Once they're in, they get used to it, they can live with it, life moves on. But putting it in, taking it out, putting it back in, emotionally was going to be more of a roller coaster. So I'm very relieved to know that at the very least we can avoid the one on the ones at 37th and 42nd. That's actually great news. And I would think that we would want the one at Linwood regardless of what we do, both the diverter and the light, because that's a tough intersection for everybody except people driving 45 miles an hour on Linwood.
Yeah, I mean, it is the one diverter that really has showed that it has the most advantageous, coupled with the traffic calming devices for the whole system to work between us and the county. It's kind of one of the key pieces.
Two things occur to me, though. Without those diverters, that then says that we have to build the path through, I always forget, is it Murphy or McFarland?
So one of the
McFarland, we have to build the path through McFarland for that to work. And I would also, just based on the increased traffic on Railroad, almost say that we almost have to build the path on Railroad before we do this, given how much traffic we're going to push down there.
As far as a timing issue.
Yeah, timing-wise.
There could definitely be some arguments made for that. The one thing I will mention about the path on the McFarland site and on the Murphy site, technically, is that actually is a pre-existing path in our TSP, not associated with the Monroe Street Greenway. It's actually the Railroad Avenue Regional Trail that will go from Clackamas Town Center by the Aquatic Center, down Railroad Avenue, up through Murphy, and then connect all the way back to the Springwater, up along 29th. So that's actually another east-west corridor path. So that path, no matter which option you choose, that path would still be there.
Right.
Sure, it's just a timing thing.
Right.
But I think you're right about railroad, though, too, yeah.
Yeah, if we push, what was it, over 100 cars? I can't remember your
on the railroad.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I believe it was.
I think it was in the middle.
No, it was in the middle one.
40 and 100 in the peak hour.
Yeah.
I mean, it's already a pretty scary street to walk or ride a bike on.
Right, and we are getting the first piece of the path.
Right, I know. That's what, about a third of it or a quarter of it?
No.
No. I'm being helpful. Wishful thinking.
A couple blocks.
Okay.
I know there's probably some people that would have things to say too, but if you have any other questions.
Can we have, I'm sorry, I can't remember
Scott.
your name. Scott, right. Can you come up for a minute?
Check pull the chair. Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Scott Holscher, Clackamas County Transportation Planner. So I'm just here tonight to answer any questions. I was the planner who was the project manager for the county section of Monroe to the east of Linwood. So I don't really have anything prepared, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
So I was not involved in that half of the study other than the very first day of it. I went along on the ride. And
it was about 95 degrees. I remember that day well.
One thing I thought, well, at least they've got this going for them. There's this gap where cars aren't used to going, so they won't have to try and reduce vehicle traffic because of that gap. And so now I'm hearing that they're removing that gap, thereby creating more problems for.
Well, to clarify the gap, it's actually the gap to vehicle traffic will still be in place. So when we say removing it, we're only opening it, we're proposing only to open it to bicycles and pedestrians.
Excellent.
Cool. I
misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Yeah, our concept plan, there was a lot of discussion about that, and our plan does show a closed gap to vehicles. So it actually is kind of a natural traffic diverter in place.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a very rudimentary dirt path that you can walk through there, as you remember on the field trip. Our plan shows an improvement to multi-use path standards through that gap. So it'd be a 12-foot wide paved path for pedestrians and bicyclists.
Excellent. Cool. Yeah, that's good news.
Yeah, that works.
Anybody else have any questions for Scott? Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Before we
thank you.
Can we take 5 minutes?
Okay, sure. So we're going to take 5 minutes recess, and we will be back at 8. Let's call it 8:10, just to make life.
We have 7 minutes. Okay.
And then.
3 for them so far.
Take a look before, why don't you take a look and just make sure that I get it.
All right. We are back. So, did anybody have any further questions of staff or the consultant before we start taking testimony?
I did not.
Okay. So let's start with Heather Ray.
Hi, I'm Heather Ray from the Hector Campbell neighborhood in the city of Milwaukee. David Aschenbrenner would be doing this, and he is sorry that he could miss it, but I'm here. So I wrote a memo because cameras make me nervous, and I didn't want to forget anything, but I'm just going to summarize that, so I promise I won't read the whole thing right now. About 3 years ago, the Hector Campbell NDA had a meeting with 11 of its members and decided they were opposed to using diverters in any way east of 224 based on like an original Greenway plan. But given the new information that's become available about the Monroe Greenway and the City Council's strong commitment to the project, Hector Campbell NDA wants to revise its current stance to not oppose diverters outright or oppose the project outright or support it until we have new information that we're looking for. We would like specific information on the impacts and any possible remedies for diverted traffic through our neighborhood. Maybe unintended diverted traffic that maybe isn't included in the studies. And there are specific issues that may have been addressed already tonight, or it may be in that 1,000-page appendix, but it's not really fair to ask just common citizens to read through all that, so we would like these to be addressed by someone who could come to our meetings. So the following issues are what we would like to know. The first issue is about dealing with pedestrians on the streets where traffic is diverted, because currently if you have cars and bicycles traveling through the area, some of those streets are really quiet and people are used to just kind of walking in the street from one place to another. So we'd like to know where those people are supposed to go, and are there plans to improve those streets?
You watched the testimony. Do you have concepts of which those streets you're interested in that answer to?
So specifically, well, not all of Washington Street has sidewalks on both sides, and there are some gaps. So we would want to know what's going to happen with that. And then there are other streets, Garrett Drive, Ada Lane, and Home Avenue, where traffic could possibly be diverted, and we want to know what specifically you have planned on those streets and the intersections along there. And I listed that on number 5. There may be other streets. We haven't had a chance to meet with a whole lot of neighbors in our neighborhood since this issue has presented itself. We're trying to get more people to the meeting to really see what people think of this, but we don't feel like a whole lot of people are informed about exactly what's happening. So that's another reason we want to change our stance on it, just to get more people involved in the process. The second question we have is about lane widths. People are concerned when cars are parked on both sides of the streets and some of this traffic is diverted. They want to know if 2 cars can pass, and what's the visibility for bicyclists and pedestrians and cars in that situation. Again, where do people go? Yes, go ahead.
I want to try and understand that. So.
Okay.
The areas where the bicycles and the pedestrians are supposed to go will have less cars on it. That's the whole concept of this whole thing.
Correct.
So there will actually be less cars by design where the bicycles and pedestrians are supposed to go. So I'm having a hard time understanding the concern about...
It's about the park in the neighborhood where you have people don't use their garages necessarily. They park on both sides of the street, which narrows the lane width.
Yeah.
And so you may be decreasing the amount of car traffic, but you are adding bicycle traffic, and you will have both. You're not going to eliminate the car traffic. So we're concerned about visibility, especially people pulling into their street side parking and getting out. I mean, it's concern for everybody who would be in the road. And again, are there sidewalk improvements associated with this, so you can at least get pedestrians out of the road if you're narrowing the lane width? So it's just concern all around on the width of those lanes.
It won't be getting narrower.
Well, okay.
I'm just wanting to make sure that we are understanding what you guys have a concern about so that we can get you answers.
Right.
So the lane won't actually be getting narrower than what it is now.
You're just adding the component of bicyclists.
Which bicyclists can already go up there. They're not disallowed from going there. So there may be more bicycle traffic.
Can I help her out? Can I help her out?
You'll be testifying in a minute. So.
Okay. So I could get clarification from the NDA about that, but they're just basically concerned about lane widths on the Greenway when there are cars parked on both sides of the streets and how we're handling that. So this is an ongoing process. Just that's a question that came up, so it's in my memo. There's a question about a crosswalk at 42nd Avenue and Washington Street in the Washington alignment concept. Will that be included? And number 5, we've already kind of covered. Will there be improvements to other streets and intersections connected to this project? And they're listed there. The main thing that Hector Campbell wants to convey is we want to be involved in the process, and we're committed to an active role in the discussion and planning of any and all projects in the neighborhood bounds. And we have an open invitation to anyone who wants to come and discuss their concerns at any time. We encourage all involved parties to practice an open dialogue. Oh, I'm over. Sorry.
Because I slowed you down.
Okay.
And that's why I kept stopping.
So our NDA meetings are the second Monday of every month at 6:30 p.m. at the Milwaukee Public Safety Building, with the exception of April 9th. We have switched it to the Milwaukee Museum, so that's kind of confusing. But we will be discussing this topic in depth there. And please contact David Aschenbrenner if you would like to set aside time on the meeting agenda. That's all I have.
And Mayor, we will be sending staff to that meeting, so there will be a community dialogue that night.
Can you leave your memo for staff so that they can
everyone has.
Yeah. Oh, they have it. Excellent.
Well, we have it.
Right, I just didn't know.
Yeah, they have it. Yeah. And we have it too.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Besides me, sorry for interrupting you and making you more nervous. I didn't mean to do that. All right, Bernie, you're up.
You're using the timer, though. How am I going to ask you questions and have a dialogue with you?
Well, you're not supposed to.
We can ask you questions, but you're not meant to ask us questions. You can ask questions, but we're not necessarily.
We have one for Chuck and for DKS.
So sit and.
Do I need to identify myself in the
address?
Yes, please. Okay. Bernie Stout, 4647 Southeast Ada Lane. Part of the Washington Street alignment is Ada Lane. My first question is, for 3 years, we've heard about cars and traffic, cars and traffic. What about how many people have been using it for bicycles and pushing their babies and walking and skipping and roller skating on both routes, on Monroe and Washington? How do you measure your success rate after this, whatever's going to be built, without that information? Maybe give them some more business. Secondly, Ada Lane is curved. My driveway is like this. I already have problems because there's no stop signs in our neighborhood. You check the route, there's no stop signs. I look both ways, get down, and whammo, there's somebody in my rearview mirror, and they're tailing me all the way down the street. I thought it was the only one. I'm not special. All my neighbors have told me they have the same problem. The house next door has become a rental. There's been 8 people in and out of there just last year. Across the street, same thing too. Around the corner, there's an Airbnb. And you're asking, well, it's the street width doesn't change. But let me tell you, the cars parked on both sides does considerably. Just since this project started, we're getting more cars parked. There's the Monroe Street apartments coming in. That's 226 units. There's approximately 40 houses being built right now. There's houses that have been torn down. In the Hector Campbell neighborhood, you had 226 people plus their mates and their cars, and the only way out of their place on the one side is Washington Street, and then they're supposed to get over to go to work probably at Kaiser or something. It almost seems like this study is obsolete before we get started. The numbers are already growing. When is railroad going to be built? You know, it's like, it's a east-west, two of them. How are we going to know that they're working and how they're going to work? I mean, you're doing these studies, but it doesn't seem like you have enough information. I hate to say it, you need to build one of them. I mean, I'd like to see you build railroad first because it's separated from all cars. Everybody using it, their life longevity is going to be better on railroad than any of this on Monroe. I mean, David Aschenbrenner said the end of December to you guys, there's plans change. I'd love to see you change your plans right now and get railroad in first, do another traffic study, let some of the houses get built, see if the builder's going to build the 226 apartments in Monroe, and then start thinking about Monroe. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, so I have a question for you before you go. So you saw this traffic study. Would your preference be that we do the diversions at 37th and 42nd, thereby pushing more car traffic onto Washington, or would your preference be that we don't do those diversions and we put the Greenway up Washington?
Mayor Gamba, and I'm going back to 2015, if you would guarantee that those sidewalks from 42nd in Washington to 444 Southeast Washington get just on one side of the street, that gets completed, and either Garrett or Ada Lane sidewalks back to Monroe, my anxiety level would go down dramatically. Because right now that you've done the bump outs, it's like a shooting gallery coming around that corner when there's people in the street. And there's no stop signs in the neighborhood.
Okay.
That might help too. I mean, but I haven't heard that in 3 years. I haven't heard that.
About the sidewalks. Okay.
All I've heard is eventually. And this to me is happening now.
Well,
if you do, well, it's been identified as Washington alignment, and I realize it's not a real science. There's problems. I just rode my bike up Johnson Creek, the Springwater corridor. There are two guys with stuff at that, where they redid the sewer system a couple of years ago. It wasn't done right. They have to rip it all up. They're re-engineering it. That must have cost millions. And and we don't know how this is going to work, but I'd sure like to get the people off the street. That's my bottom line. I don't want to see anybody get hurt.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stout.
Janet.
Thanks, Bernie.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Janet Cartmill, and I live at 5466 Southeast Monroe in Milwaukee. And I've kind of looked at this little thing that came out. I want to thank Chuck for letting me know that this was happening, because otherwise I wouldn't have known. It seemed like in the Campbell neighborhood there were some things on posts, but I never saw any of that west or east of that when my husband and I do our morning walk. So anyway, just FYI. I'm concerned more about what's happening from the end of the path on Washington or whatever further east, because the diverters were going to kind of cut back on traffic through that section, and without those diverters, are we going to get the numbers down, and are the numbers that we're being reading about here, are they current numbers? Or are they still using the numbers from 2015 when the eastbound figures at 44th were 1,385 and the westbound figures at 58th were 2,040 something? And so I'm just a little concerned about the safety of people because there's no other path there other than on Monroe Street. And from my perspective as a resident of that street, it seems like the traffic has increased since 2015. I haven't gone out and counted it, but that's just my sense of things trying to back out of our driveway onto Monroe. So anyway, that's my concern. And then the other part of it, somewhere in this report, it seems like I read that the path there would be for pedestrians and bicyclists. That path is only 7 feet wide, and if we're talking about the gap being 12 feet wide or in that vicinity for bikes and pedestrians, then the path on Monroe at 7 feet is not going to be big enough for bikes to be on there with it. And I thought the original thing that happened when we looked at this, and I was on the committee, that the bikes were not going to be on the path, the bikes would be in the street.
I think what they might be referencing is that you might have kids.
Kid bikes, I could understand that, but they just said bikes, and I thought, yeah, someone needs to point that out.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan.
Did anybody have questions?
No. Thanks
so,
for coming down.
if you guys could come back up, please.
Yeah, I did jot down a few of those as I was trying to wrap things. The path we were actually referring to there is the McFarland path. The path connects Oak.
That's only 7 feet wide?
No, that's a 12-foot wide, but that's when we're saying that's a multi-use path.
Okay.
Because that's part of the trail network.
Yeah.
We really looked at this as it in our study, it came down to everything from 42nd on Monroe was kind of works. And everything from Campbell back works. So what does it take to get the section between the railroad tracks and 42nd to work? That's where we ended up concentrating, because that was the part that we couldn't get to work initially.
So are the sidewalks on Washington part of the SAFE
No,
program?
they're not.
So is there any current CIP to build those sidewalks out?
Not on Washington.
Okay.
So that would have to be part of this plan if that was a mitigation that we would need to take a factor of.
All right. It would be, let's figure out how much sidewalk.
I actually drove it. There's a lot of sidewalks in places, so I had driven it just yesterday. I'd probably guess that you're probably talking at maximum a half a dozen blocks, 6 blocks worth of sidewalks. It really wouldn't be that hard to do.
Okay. Shoot. So I'm assuming that these are based on today's numbers, or are they even a projection out to
2020?
2020 numbers, and that's using the current development data that we have.
We actually sent crews out and counted.
So right, but the models, all new numbers. Are the models using current numbers or 2020 numbers?
We start with 2015, and then we updated the models to reflect all the 2017 counts that we collected, and then we increased the overall volume by another 2% to kind of get, based on kind of historical growth, to get to 2020. Okay. We also kind of accounted for some of the traffic volume shifts that we'd expect to see as part of the Boyer Street extension. So those are kind of the steps we took to get to 2020. Of course, it is a forecast and a projection,
sure,
but in the not too distant future.
Okay, thanks.
A couple other answers to a couple of the other questions that were raised. 42nd and Washington, we didn't mention that. The plan does call for a reconfiguration of that intersection to switch the stop signs, so put 4-way stops in, actually, right?
A 4-way stop at 42nd.
42nd and Washington. If the Washington Street alignment was picked, there would be a 4-way stop at the 42nd and Washington.
Okay.
So that way, that would facilitate the active path pedestrian crossing.
And the stop sign at 40th would get flipped so that people riding bikes across Washington Street.
40th and
There's a stop sign right now that stops you if you're traveling along Washington Street. And so that
on the hill.
Would get, yeah, that would get flipped so that through traffic for bikes could be accommodating. They wouldn't have to stop. And someone told me people who do ride there now would tend to not stop at that stop anyway, so.
Now, one thing, the Washington Street alignment's connection to home is a safe route. So it is actually in the first bond that you guys authorized tonight.
Okay.
The other thing, there was some confusion, and I checked with her a little bit. Dave's email to me earlier actually was talking about bike lanes also. They were wondering if there was bike lanes on Washington, and there wasn't ever plans for that. It was just going to be sharrows, and that, I think, is part of their concern about width of Washington, is there's really not room for bike lanes also because of the parked cars and the parked car doors opening, and how do bicyclists navigate, you know, with the parked cars. The idea here is they would actually take their right as a vehicle in the lane, just like a car would with the sharrows.
Chuck, could you also speak briefly about the CIP discussion you and I have been having about Linwood?
Yeah, as one of the other projects, everybody knows that Linwood is also a safe program in the first bond. And as part of that, we have tentatively included in the CIPs is coming forward to you to fund the intersection improvements at Linwood and Monroe as part of the Linwood SAFE program, which is constructing sidewalks on both sides of Linwood, all the way down from Monroe to Railroad.
And that will include at that intersection?
Oh, that
diversion and the light.
That diversion and the light. Yeah. And it also includes 2 RFBs in front of Linwood School.
2 what?
2 rectangular flashing beacons in front of Linwood School. So, I mean, there's a lot of different, the RFB at 37th and Washington is included in the SAFE program, as well as the RFB at Home and King.
Okay. Cool.
Can you remind me where Railroad is on priority?
It would be number 2 in the match based upon the initial thought processes. It was number 1 with PSAC. Railroad, I guess I really don't know why it ended up number 2 without looking at the scoring again, but I do know that PSAC really liked Railroad as far as the path.
Yeah, it seems given the volume we're going to push down there and the fact that it's already bad and the fact that it's already got no infrastructure, whereas you can kind of function on Monroe, and particularly if we do that, the diversion at Linwood, that's going to push the volumes down on Monroe anyway.
It does not push them down as much as the traffic calming, though, correct?
I can't remember which one's relatively more, but the Linwood diverter had kind of a wider geographic diversion. Okay. They're both quite effective. I mean, they're complementary to each other, and they work together.
Yeah, it seems like we might want to prioritize Railroad. I know that Monroe is going to be the one that the county proposes in the next round of.
And we've always been talking that we'd go with them.
Yeah.
I will tell you that one thing Scott didn't mention is the county hasn't formally adopted theirs yet, so they're not totally finished with their plan. They need to go back, and that was one reason this is a joint study, is because they needed this. The board asked for this data back to them. The other key piece of this will be putting the signal at 42nd and Harrison into the CIP.
What would the timing on that be?
We probably could accommodate that within this next 6-year CIP. I do have room within there, but But that would be key as far as traffic flow because of the amount of diversions headed up to Harrison and King. That's what we found out. That's the biggest benefit to keep people diverting up there. Because it's a four-way stop right now, and it's a cumbersome four-way stop because of the left turn primary movement.
Remind me the cost of Monroe conceptually.
Our section's 12. I believe the county's is 8. Does that sound right?
I don't remember off the top of my head. It's at least, we have in our plan Thompson as well, which adds a substantial amount.
They need you on the mic.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can actually find the numbers here fairly quick.
I believe, for some reason, I'm thinking it was a 20 total.
Actually, it's in the appendix. It was, if you include Thompson, which is the section down to Wickham Elementary, it's about, with that section, I think about 11 to 12 million.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it's fairly high.
So we're almost equal then.
Yeah. But don't quote me on that number.
Okay. So roughly, we're looking at 24 total for that. And railroad?
Railroad is 8, I believe, is what it's in our CIP.
And that's
don't quote me on that, but it's on. It should be actually in our current CIP.
Including the amount that's already going to be finished, or not?
No, that was prior when there was nothing.
So it'll be less than that, a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any?
I don't have any questions.
Kelly, would you mind coming up? Sorry. So, Tiger Grant, what's the next round? When's the timing on the next round of that?
Oh, it just came out, so I believe, and I'm going to do the don't quote me thing too, but I think it would be in the fall would be when we need to turn those in. But I can confirm that and check.
Yeah.
We actually asked the senator's office to get us a date, and they didn't have it yet, so we got a little time.
Yeah, it seems like this would be a good one to go after for Tiger because it's a good size for that. And then we could use railroad for MTIP. Cool. That was all I had. I figured you're so dialed on all that stuff. I figured you'd know.
No, we'll just have to keep our finger on it because it's always authorized on a year-to-year basis. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have any? Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was really interesting. That's a really good study. Very, very helpful.
All the graphics to it actually made it much easier to follow.
Much easier, yeah.
So I guess, where would you look for
you had
us?
Questions.
Yeah, so what would you be looking for us as the engineering department to do next on this particular project? The next stage was originally for us to test diverters. We have been doing some survey work out there with the intention of, because we submitted for the RFFA program last time, one of the things we found during that process was we were lacking some information where the traffic circles were supposed to go and the diverters were supposed to go, especially around potential right-of-way acquisition requirements. So we've been surveying those intersections so we can try to get some design work potentially done on those intersections and determine the right-of-way requirements associated with the project to better get an understanding of the final cost. That would be probably my recommendation for the next step, is to continue that with some concept type designs and trying to get a little bit farther, because the original program that you approved had nothing in it for right-of-way acquisition.
Aren't we doing the miniature traffic circles?
Yes, but with ADA requirements on the corners, you do lose the land in a hurry.
It's going to be interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, if you have any.
All right, so you need to know whether or not you think you should move ahead with the diversion?
Are we going to proceed with some conceptual types of stuff? Are we going to go do the test diverters? Are we going to kind of put it on hold for a while? Where does it sit in our priority list?
Well, assuming we had buckets of money, I would say it's very high on our priority list, but we don't have buckets of money yet.
Are you thinking that you want to put railroad in front of this? So we've been prioritizing whenever we see a grant, whenever we talk to people, we always say Monroe is it. So
it's strategically, it's going to come down to figuring out which one are we going to get the money for, right? And if by combining with the county and it being the bigger sort of regional project, we are more likely to get the Monroe grant through either of those processes, then I would say we have to be strategic about the money. And so that's really the answer has always been when we have the money, right?
I totally understand. We do get people looking at us point blank and just saying, what's your priority, right? So when we're talking to, say, our federal delegation, and there's not necessarily constraints around which project.
Our priority is do all the things.
Right. No, that's my priority. But so those are, these I think are the hard questions. It doesn't sound like anybody's excited about testing diverters based on the fact that we've brought you additional information and it's probably not where you want to go. We are proposing that we proceed in the CIP with the Linwood-Monroe interchange. That is where we had an accident earlier in the year. It's also where it blazes red whenever you look at accident rates. And I feel like that's important for us to try and tackle. Yep.
I also have money in the supplemental budget that was passed in the SAFE program to do the concept planning for both Railroad and Monroe. I have not pulled the trigger yet on the railroad piece, which would include a full survey in order to, railroad actually scares me more than Monroe from an engineering viewpoint because there's a lot of retaining walls going to be involved in railroad. And so to get a concept to where we can get that better price of what that path is going to be would be critical if we're looking at pursuing with railroad. So, I could definitely keep proceeding that way and doing concepts on both, but at some point we're going to have to just stop because we do have to focus on your primary goal of the SAFE program and the bond that you authorized today.
Right, but this, both of those items are pretty high on the priority list for SAFE, just depending on where we get grant money, right?
True. Both of those projects would have been in the top 10 projects if there was money available.
Right.
Of all of the projects, of all 60-some projects in the SAFE program, they would have been in the top 10 if there was enough money, if they weren't such a big ticket item.
So I guess my personal feedback would be let's be shovel ready on both of those so that we're ready to go for grant on either or both, depending on what opportunities arise.
Do we have the design cost for that?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
You're saying we have the funding for the two designs?
I had the concept designs, not full designs. She was asking me if we had the cost so I could put it into the CIP. Is this where she was headed with that?
Because we'll be putting it forward to you guys for prioritization.
Is that where you were saying, Mark, to move forward with the design on both, the concept design on both?
Well, yeah. We've got concept design on Monroe, right?
Right. We'd go to preliminary design as the next step where we would actually identify the right-of-way and actually have full surveys done of both corridors so we knew. The county actually is doing their surveys now on their corridor to try to get a better idea, so we would just do the rest of our surveys also.
Okay. And if by some miracle we managed to defederalize those grant monies and we got the $24 million for Monroe defederalized, that's almost enough to do railroad too. That's the math. So yeah, I would say let's get as close to shovel ready as we can get on both projects so that we're strategically ready to go after grants anything that comes up, particularly if something comes up around hurry up and spend it kind of stuff.
So Chick, just one question on that front. I know we've run into design issues when we design things without the funding structures in place to actually pay for them, and whether or not the designs get out of date or there are federal requirements. So I just want to make sure that you feel comfortable that you can use dollars today without a construction date. You can go to that level of planning.
To full shovel ready?
Yeah.
Or I'd want to check on that a little bit before I answer that. But we could definitely get to like 60%.
60%, that's what I was going to say,
without any issues. The key thing is both of these are large enough that we would be doing consultant acquisition probably on it anyway. So that's our biggest issue usually with federal dollars, is whether they'll allow, how much design work they'll allow by the local agency if we're not a certified agency, which we're not. That's what I'll have to check on, unless Kelly knows the answer right off the bat.
So I guess I would just ask that council leave it somewhat vague tonight, that we will look at what the cost will be, and we'll look at putting those costs into the budget for your consideration up to the level that we feel like we can complete without having a funding source. Okay.
Yeah, the biggest problem would be the intersection designs themselves. Those are what keeps changing as far as code goes.
Right,
it's not the path itself, it's the intersection designs and the ADA requirements.
And removing ADA requirements.
Hey, there she is.
Can I say one thing?
Sure.
So I would just ask if you could, if we can be nimble. So a lot of times with these grant programs, particularly ones that are for large dollar amounts, there are requirements related to when you can deliver that project, how fast you can move. And I think at the current level of information we have on railroad, I don't know how much right-of-way acquisition there is, how fast we can actually proceed through that. So getting more information would be great. Until we know more, I think it's a little hard for me to say, yes, you'd want to go this way or that way with a particular project. So I just want to underscore, do more, get better information, but be nimble, because if we, particularly with a Tiger grant, you don't have a ton of time to turn that project around. You're going to have to pick the one that can actually be delivered in the constraints of the program.
Well, I don't even know that we'd go for Tiger on railroad. It seems like a Monroe.
Yep.
I don't know. I mean, again, it depends, because that program, it has shifted. It's shifted under the Obama administration. It will shift again. What they're looking for the next time we see it, I don't know what it will be or if it will come. So I think there will be very few opportunities to go after large dollar amounts, and we're going to need to position ourselves accordingly. So.
Right. So that's my point of being as close as we can realistically be without spending money that we're going to have to re-spend, so that we're ready to pounce like a tiger on whatever grant we can.
My whole goal was to get far enough along so we know exactly how much right-of-way acquisitions we need. So we can actually get to that level of certainty when we're applying for grants and know how much time it's going to take. Ideally, if we had enough money, if we could acquire the right-of-way ahead of time before we even apply for grant.
Speeds things up dramatically.
Speeds things up dramatically. But you can't do it after you've got the grant, because then it has to follow the federal process.
And sometimes it has to have followed the federal process if you're going to get federal money. So.
Yeah. But we could do that with just like we're doing on railroad with appraisals, and I mean, that's just a process.
Thanks for letting me back again.
Denny was also kind enough to remind me that when you did the last round of the Monroe, you actually adopted a resolution that outlined next steps. So we may come back to you in a few months after we've done a little more research and feel more comfortable about what it would look like with an amendment to that resolution. So you can expect to see something probably in June or July from us around that issue.
Okay, cool.
And so tonight we're not making any kind of thumbs up or down on the Washington versus the Monroe's? Okay.
Well, okay, that is a great question.
I thought we talked about the diverters.
Well, yeah, because that was a question that
was a question.
He asked us to.
I mean, from my standpoint, Washington seems really obvious.
It did to mine, but I just want to make sure, because I didn't hear us actually.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of thumbs up on Washington.
It was one of my questions in my staff memo, so thank you for pointing that out.
Was there other questions we didn't answer?
Nope. That was the key one. I mean, the key one right now is trying to juggle our staff load and what our priorities are with everything that we have coming down over the next couple of years. So,
you guys are busy?
I just want to say my only concern, this is just based on my own personal experience with, with greenways that move, is that neither Milwaukee nor Portland is doing a very good job of directing people when they do that. So
You mean when it's not one street that's straight on?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many times when I used to commute on the Selwood Gap, all the time. I mean, there was just always a question. Someone was asking me for directions. How do I get back onto the Springwater Trail?
And that's a very good point. There actually is a wayfinding component to this project, and in the urban renewal plan, there's actually a wayfinding component in this area, in the central area.
Okay.
In the central area, especially in the central area where we have all the different paths coming together.
The problem area that I'm identifying is Washington, which up in the neighborhood, not in the central area.
But we could definitely add that as part of this plan. That would be outside of our urban renewal area. But we have a lot of paths. If you actually look at Oak and Railroad, that's basically everything comes together there at that rail crossing. There'll be a lot of ways to go out of that rail crossing. And realistically,
confusion. It's adding to the confusion. So, that's the same confusion. That's the same problem with when when you're not staying on Monroe and you're going into the neighborhood. All of a sudden you're presented with all of these options, and if it's the first time in the neighborhood because you're using it as a regional route, then you don't know which ones are the dead ends, and you don't know which one is going to take you back to the the place where you might eventually want to go. So that's my only issue, is just let's make sure that wayfinding. We're not just saying, oh, well, yeah, wayfinding's included because it's part of, the urban renewal, when my issue is wayfinding outside of that area.
Okay. Good point. I mean, realistically, one thing I guess I'll mention too is it's really the most difficult part about this whole plan is going to be the Oak Street Railroad crossing. That is a 2 to 3, 4-year project probably by itself, just to get Union Pacific approvals, reconfigure all the signals, reconfigure all the crossing arms, put in all the traffic because there's a traffic signal goes there, so that would be 2 traffic signals, one for Campbell, one for Oak and Railroad, in order for the pre-signal. It's a huge undertaking, that one intersection.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Great job.
And thanks to everybody who...
Yes, and thank you all for your testimony. Stay tuned. To be continued. All right.
Anytime cereal.
So I have some announcements, and then you guys can do anything that we missed. Our city manager, Ann Ober, is holding an open door event this week on Thursday, March 22nd from 8 a.m. till 10 a.m. here at City Hall. If you would like to meet and talk with the city manager, please stop by. Volunteer registration is now open for the 2018 Milwaukee Earth Day Cleanup event, scheduled for Saturday, April 21st from 10 a.m. till noon at Ball Michelle Park. To learn more and to register to volunteer, visit www.milwaukeeoregon.gov and look under the featured events. After the Earth Day event, participate in an Arbor Day celebration from noon until 1:30 p.m. at the same location, which will include fun activities for kids, a tree giveaway, a ceremonial tree planting, and more. The Downtown Milwaukee Business Association is once again sponsoring a downtown bunny hop on Saturday, March 31st from 2 p.m. till 5 p.m. Children are encouraged to bring an Easter basket, dress in your favorite Easter outfit, and visit each of the participating downtown businesses for an Easter treat left by the Easter Bunny. Save the date for the first comprehensive plan town hall. Scheduled for Wednesday, April 4th at 6 p.m. at the Waldorf School. Help us craft a comprehensive plan to serve our best roadmap for a sustainable future. Light refreshments and childcare will be provided. Please RSVP to plan@milwaukeeoregon.gov and indicate if child care is needed. Anything else?
Nothing further?
I'm actually just checking with Kelly. Do we have any updates on 42nd or anything that we want to talk about?
Yeah, I should grab a check back. The goal, the 42nd, the hope was to be done tonight. So it may extend into tomorrow, but they're doing the final paving. Hopefully it's done now. They needed to wrap up by 10, so that's my hopeful announcement, is that they're finishing right now, but there's a potential that it could extend it tomorrow, but they're trying to avoid that due to weather. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you.